Chezi says, I'm speaking today to Christian Baxter about biblical criticism. Prepare yourself. Oy, the kafira, I can feel it already. Kafira is Hebrew for heresy. I listened to what I thought was an excellent discussion between Christian Baxter and Brendan Graham Dempsey, I believe his name is. I'm sorry, you have a long name and it's hard. Let me check just to not be a horrible person like I usually am. I have just, where is it? Yes. No. Yes. Brendan Graham Dempsey. Yes, that's right. Brendan Graham Dempsey. Excellent discussion. I put a link to it under the community tab. I don't know if he was kind of responding to my previous video. I think I at least influenced the discussion a little bit. So last time, and I have to continue saying I haven't read his book. I'm not well versed in Dempsey's views, and I'm actually a tiny bit reluctant to focus in on his views, right? Because this is something we're playing with. But last time, my concern was, imagine that historians find the tomb of Jesus and they actually find the tomb, and I don't know how it could possibly be so definitive that this is the tomb of Jesus. But let's assume that by all normal, reasonable methods, you could not doubt that here we are with the bones of Jesus, right? Could you still call yourself a Christian? Well, not any type of Christian we talk about today, right? Like basically the entire thing. I mean, you I guess you could be a Muslim, but like, could you be a Christian, right? Somebody who believes in the resurrection, in the bodily resurrection, right? You certainly could not take the Gospels at their word, right? And my concern with Dempsey was that he seemed to be playing some sort of, I think he called it switching, which totally denied that. I don't think. Well, he made perfectly clear that that's not what he's doing, and I'm glad. But when he was talking to Christian, he gave a different example, which was the story of the woman caught in adultery, right? Which everybody knows the story. A woman who was caught in adultery is brought to Jesus, and Jesus writes something on the ground, and he says, "Let he who is without the sin cast the first stone," and everybody walks away. I have one of my favorite jokes is then a woman casts a stone and everybody stones the adulteress, and Jesus turns to the woman and says, "Mom, I didn't mean you." Catholics and um, Eastern Orthodox particularly like that joke. Um, the and if you look historically through the textual manuscript evidence, it becomes very clear that um, somebody wrote this tradition, this tale, down um, in the margins of the Gospel of John, and eventually that marginal note got got integrated in and in different places, and then eventually it became it was so popular that it became what it is, right? Which is one of the favorite stories people have of of the Gospels, from the Gospels about Jesus. But any decent textual critic will tell you that was not included in the Gospel of John. And so Dempsey was saying, well, you shouldn't say that that Jesus said that. And this has in it a skepticism of modernity, which I think goes too far. I don't think you have proven that Jesus didn't say it. You have good indication that it wasn't part of the original Gospel of John, that it doesn't belong in the Gospels, possibly doesn't even belong in your Bible at all. Does that mean you should disbelieve it? I don't think so. I will go back to my famous line, which is another thing Dempsey really dislikes, which is, I believe the world was created 5,784 years, 7 months, and a few days ago. Seems pretty precise. And scientifically, that seems like a pretty... why would you believe that, right? Modernity would claim that it is that is not a credible claim. But I don't care. The reason I believe that the date of the world is the date that it is specifically that if I look on my parents' ketubah, which is their marriage document, it gives a date. We need a live heart rate tracker Jacob reaction. Not sure what you mean. 5,784 years. There is a date on my parents' marriage document, and that is my presupposition of the date, because it says Libriat ha'olam, since the creation of the earth. Right? This is something that Judaism teaches. And my question becomes, why would I disbelieve it? Now, I did disbelieve it. I very much did before I went to yeshiva. And the yeshiva I went to, Rabbi David Gottlieb, there are many of his videos on YouTube. He was the philosophy of science guy. A great philosophical apologist for Hasidic Judaism. But he isn't what convinced me to change my view. Although, I mean, his classes had great impact on me. He's brilliant. The Talmud specifically says, and spends pages and pages discussing, that the world was created, nivra betzivionam, was created wholly. It was created in its beautiful colors, is the literal translation. In its majesty. It talks about shor par, right? That bull which was created fully, wholly, etz oseh pri, trees with fruit on them. This is called Last Thursdayism or Omphalos, Omphalos. And Omphalos, I believe, is a Greek, might be a Latin term, meaning belly button. In all its vibrancies, yeah. And so it's Greek. Thank you, Emma. By the way, if anybody who actually can engage with this discussion wants to jump on, please do. So Omphalos is the idea that when God created Adam, did he create Adam with a belly button? Because that would indicate that he had an umbilical cord, right? That's the reason we have belly buttons, is because that's where the umbilical cord was attached. It's a scar, it's a remnant of a process that did not occur with Adam. And so the question becomes, would God create, now I won't get into there's all kinds of nitty-gritty there, but there is no scientific way of proving that the world was not created last Thursday with all of our memories and everything. And in fact, Judaism teaches that the world was created, is created at every moment, right? And that's why we get into the B theory of time. Now, and this is why I think what John Vervaeke calls post-nominalist Neoplatonism, or what I've been abbreviating as Post Platonism, is better than what we've been terming Metamodernity. I have not really delved into Dempsey, but I am not coming up with a new revelation. I am trying to understand the revelation which was handed to me from my ancestors with a real struggle as described by Rabbi Soloveitchik in Halachic Man, And again, note 4 is a foundational text to my thinking. But I believe that which Rabbi Soloveitchik wrote in note 4 is the Torah that was taught to Moses on Mount Sinai 3,000 years ago. And that's not because I have reformulated Judaism that way. This is how Judaism has been teaching itself for thousands of years. And so I want to integrate everything that nominalism and post-nominalism, post-modernity has to teach, because my God is the God of truth. But I am ultimately a Neoplatonist in the idea that what all the Neoplatonists for thousands of years did is try to take every source of truth and integrate it into a unified understanding to the best of their abilities. And that's why I believe that which was called Neoplatonism is what we must return to. But that does not mean going back in time, because it is impossible to go back in time. Human being cannot go back in time. Yes.
I'm just wondering your response. If you're studying just postmodernism, one of the things that is often brought up is the world wars. And essentially you have a form of Christianity. Obviously, they would be talking about Christianity, but I would include Judaism within this, which was incapable of actually understanding what occurred in the Great War. And then they were hoping that was the war to end all wars, and it turns out they were deeply wrong. And so they speak of this as more of not as a logical thing. It doesn't sound logical to me. It sounds like it's more of a emotional reaction more than anything else to the world wars creates how we feel about our faiths. And I'm wondering your thoughts on that, particularly on forms of Judaism after the Holocaust.
I don't think Hasidic Judaism had any difficulty whatsoever with the world wars. And I think not just really resurgence, but revolution. I mean, Hasidism is 300 years old. It has never been stronger. And the analogy of souls catching fire is used extensively with Hasidism, and World War II did nothing to dampen that, especially Chabad Hasidism. And there is a reason I am a Chabad Hasid, because I do believe that Chabad Hasidism is Torah as it was taught by God to Moses on Mount Sinai.
I mean, I would agree. I also would think, though, that World War I and World War II had no effect on the Amish. That there are communities where it didn't affect at all. But what I'm more so
hold on, I didn't say it didn't affect. Obviously, Hasidim
right.
were affected.
No.
World War II and World War I, and they dealt with it, but it had the tools. And Hasidic, this is the amazing thing, right? So this is the Jordan Peterson sphere, and how I got into the Jordan Peterson sphere is I had left Hasidic philosophy behind because I was going to concentrate on my mental health. And in concentrating on my mental health, I ended up with Jordan Peterson. And it brought me back home to Tanya, which, famously Carl Jung said on his 80th birthday, the Maggid of Mezrich, who was one of the founders of Hasidism, anticipated his entire psychology. So, I mean, I keep on coming back to Judaism because everywhere I look, it points me back to Judaism. I look at the Dead Sea Scrolls, it points me back to Judaism. I look at psychology, it points me back to Judaism. I look at my social groups and everything else, and it points me back to Judaism. And I think if you are an honest Neoplatonist, you follow the road where it takes you. And if that road takes me away from Judaism, then I should be willing to walk away from Judaism. That was my point with the bones of Jesus. If you were to show to me that in some way, I don't even know how this could possibly be proven, that Moses never existed, I would have to change my views about Judaism.
Right. What are you thinking?
I'm thinking I've explained my position as clearly as I can.
Good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree, and I feel within a similar camp as you, where I don't think I could just like, oh, it's fine if it's all bullshit. It to me would be like I couldn't have a happy marriage if my wife cheated on me. That would fundamentally, I understand that there's people who are like, oh, but you could get over it, you could do this, you could do that, and it's just like, no.
Well, are you giving Vervaeke's example, or
no? That's unintentional. Tell me, Vervaeke.
So Vervaeke, I was wondering because Vervaeke talks about how when he teaches his undergraduate class, he always starts off with a hypothetical, and he says, imagine. Well, he asks people to raise their hand if they have a significant other, and most of them do, and he says, okay, I want you to imagine that just once your significant other cheated on you and they felt so bad about it, they will never do anything like that ever again. And if you were to find out about it, it would ruin your relationship. But there's absolutely no benefit. Like your significant other is never going to cheat on you again. Would you want to know?
Yes, absolutely.
And that's what everybody said. And he said, okay, like there's no pragmatically you're making the wrong choice.
Yeah.
You want to know the truth. This is inherent to the human condition. And like, yeah, God is true. Like my God is, I mean, I don't want to turn truth into an idol. Truth isn't the only value. My God is ineffable, but one of his names is truth.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. And I see a lot of perspectives being, I keep on revisiting this concept that Jesus speaks of, where he says the kingdom of God is like yeast in a lump of dough that a woman puts in a lump of dough, and how it spreads. And it goes from one to another to another. This is in the season of weeks, this is a good conversation to be having, right? Like that you build up this thing that is going to spread and has a life of its own. And some people have even said, look, this is all still modernism. you take some of the concepts that people have not fully understood and you work it through. And for me, there are certain things that we speak of character as someone having integrity. And me and Chad were having a conversation about how the term identity means sameness. Um, and so what you have, like, identity comes from the same root as identical, right?
Right. Yeah.
Things that are the same. And so to there is a real value in knowing what a thing actually is, and having a situation where there's one exceptional moment. The exceptional moment teaches you something about the whole. So it doesn't matter that the thing only happens once. But the other thing that I would say is, like, I know people where they never cheated on anyone. And then when they cheated once, it became a pattern that was very difficult for them to break. And so the idea that, wait, this is just the exceptional situation, to me, it's not exceptional. To me,
okay. I mean, you have to take the hypothetical at face value.
Yes. Yeah.
The idea is they hated it. They thought it was a terrible idea. And they are even less likely to cheat on you afterwards than they were without it.
Right. But I would say that there is an issue of integrity. There's an issue of what the thing fully is. And that's part of what you and I are talking about. Can the thing be maintained if there's just this one instability, if there's one infidelity, if there's one thing which is off?
So for me, the issue there is actually that I don't think it should destroy your relationship if you, I mean, it seems to me that if your significant other is truly repentant, then I don't see it as a reason for it to destroy the relationship. The question becomes, is your significant other truly repentant?
Right. I think that but to treat it as though because of the way that they're feeling, nothing needs to be addressed or nothing is changed, I would deeply disagree with that.
Yeah. I mean, I think this does in some way get into the theological difference between Christianity and Judaism in regards to Jesus. Christians would say Jesus is better than David in that he never sinned.
Right.
Whereas I don't see someone who has not sinned as being human. I think Sheva Yipol Tzaddik, a righteous man falls 7 times. And the idea of the sinless Jesus is itself not very, very Jewish.
So do you think Adam was not, I mean, he is human. Adam is human before he disobeys.
Well, it's not a question of whether you have sinned. I mean, I guess some Christians would point to the temptation of Jesus, but the fact is, to sin is to be human, right? To be finite, to be a creation is to fall short of the glory of God. And I mean, I was listening. Chezi sent me a video where 2 large YouTubers, one of whom is known as being an Israeli Jewish YouTuber who engages with Muslims, and the other one is, God have mercy, a Christian, a Jew who's become a Christian, who tries to convert Jews. And they were having a discussion, and somebody was commenting on it, And the question of Jesus as intermediary became a big question. And it's like, well, choose. Is he God or is he an intermediary? If he's God, he's not an intermediary. Right? And I mean, that's where I say, when a Christian says to me that only the Father is ase, you're just telling me you believe only the Father is God. Because that is fundamental to what God is to be ase.
Where are you wanting to go with this conversation?
Wherever you want to go. I already went where I wanted to
go. Okay. Where would I want to go with this conversation?
We could discuss Judges.
What?
We could discuss Judges.
Tomorrow we'll be talking about the Book of Judges. I'm contemplating. I've been doing a lot of study into Yom Kippur, in Tractate Yoma, and just trying to break down the appearance of the priest and the importance of the priest in being clean when he performs his ritual cleanliness, right? So in Tractate Yoma, it speaks that the night before, to make matters worse, I don't know, maybe you already know this, the high priest would not sleep. So he would keep himself up with prayers. He would walk on the cold floor of the temple. There were people that would actually snap his fingers if he started trying to fall asleep. There's this image where because what if he falls asleep and he has an
emission, yes.
An emission, then he would render himself unclean. In fact, because of his position and how they took everything so literally, he had a replacement wife
because he has to be married. Yes.
Yeah, because he must be married. So if his wife has a heart attack in the middle of the night while his fingers are getting snapped, they're going to bring a woman forward, and I'm a little bit confused how he could be married to her without having such an emission. I don't understand. That's fine. Doesn't matter.
Hold on. What are you talking about? Oh, no, you can get married
without consummating?
Yes.
Are you not? I thought
only no hides. So Haisha Niknit, a Jew can get married in the way we usually do it is with a ring.
Okay.
So that's fine.
Yeah. The acceptance of the ring, which Hezi was the other day talking about the tradition related to Moses and the remnants of the stones from the 10 words, all that stuff. Yes. Okay. But so I've been wondering about this image of the one, because one of them, the four craftsmen, is.
And by the way, I think the high priest is married to two women regardless. It's polygamous, I believe. It wasn't that he would that they had somebody waiting for him to marry. I believe he was married to two women.
Okay, I might be reading it wrong, but yeah, I believe that they had a replacement just in case.
To get married to? Yeah, I think you're assuming monogamy.
Okay. Foolish Dave assuming monogamy. I try to, as often as I can, assume monogamy.
Monogamy is a good thing. Yeah. No, I believe that's one of the questions. Actually, is how can it be because monogamy in Judaism is also considered the ideal, like how could it be ideal that he would have two wives? I believe that's a question people ask. But.
Okay. But so there's this aspect of the priest where, in order for him to be able to serve the people, he cannot be unclean.
Yeah.
Do you kind of see where I'm going with that?
Kind of, but it's not like he cannot be unclean at that time. Right. We consider the life process of becoming unclean and clean again to be a natural part of life, which is a necessity
right.
of human life, right? Yes. And so, again, like David needed to repent of his sins, but in having repented of his sins, he stood where no person who has not sinned can stand.
So some people have noted that Adam, before he sins, that the position, the keeping of the holy place, the work and keep the garden, the same language is used to describe the tabernacle, of what the actions that they would do. And I would agree with the common archaeological formulation that to some extent the temple is a recreation of Eden, even the direction where you enter. And it seems that Adam is able to operate as a priest before he falls. He's commanded to do that kind of work before he falls.
Well, okay, I have to say, I mean, ultimately, even in being created, it was a fall.
Yeah, okay.
So
I'm fine with that, yeah.
Yeah, that's, I mean, this is the thing. It's like,
yeah.
This idea of perfection that, like, I just don't see it.
Yeah, and just to be clear, that is in speaking of the passages that Christians would use of the incarnation. What does it mean that he ascended, but that he had to first descend? Right? You're speaking of a fall of, yeah.
Chazi is going to be on Christian Baxter talking about biblical criticism, which I think is a huge mistake, because I know Chazi is going to be speaking all manner of silliness, but love Chazi, even though he's a heretic. And yes, Yosef would do a much better job, I think. But Yosef also needs to finish his damn dissertation. Even weirder, Christ condescended.
Yeah.
What does that mean? Is that with someone else? Like, I don't even understand what that means.
Marcus, join us. Join us and tell us in your own words.
Marcus is a nice guy. I had a couple of beers with him.
Getting down to their level, yeah. What else was I going to say? Yeah, I'm doing in connection with what is it called? In connection with Yom Kippur, I'm looking into how Melchizedek was understood, or is still understood. If you have comments on that, I'd love to hear them.
That theological crime scene you refer to as the Book of Hebrews makes the strangest. Like, he had no parents. What? Where and how? I mean, it's like I have zero idea where, like, how that makes any sense whatsoever. But some people have that in their Bible.
Yes, I do. I have that in my Bible. So I wasn't asking you about the New Testament's perspective on Melchizedek and whether or not that is to be taken literally, that the writer of Hebrews believes that he quite literally, like, it's not listed who his parents were or what he's getting at there. Because one of the traditions also is that he's angelic. That occurs within Second Temple literature, and that's one of the bits that's found in the Dead Sea Scrolls, is speaking of Melchizedek as the cloud rider, as the Son of Man, the one who would begin the year of Jubilee.
I mean, like the Midrash talks about Melchizedek, I think, being Shem or some other
Or
thing.
sometimes Enoch, or yeah.
Yeah. And honestly, to me, like going back to the Metamodernity thing,
Yeah.
right? So I once said this, and Rabbi Mullet was outraged, and I encouraged him to ask a rabbi. And to his credit, he wrote an email to Rabbi Breitowitz, and Rabbi Breitowitz answered him that I was right. And Rabbi Mullet, being who Rabbi Mullet is very willing to admit that he knows less than Rabbi Breitowitz, and accepted the decision. The question was specifically, if someone believes Abraham was there was no actual person named Abraham, that it's just an allegory, is that person still considered within the 13 principles of Jewish faith, according to Maimonides? And Rabbi Breitowitz says, yes, he is. Now, I am in no way endorsing the idea that Abraham was not an actual human being. I am in no way endorsing anybody believing that. At the same time, the boundaries of Orthodox Judaism have always been really, really wide in ways that I think my forays into Protestant Christianity have taught me, like, oh my God, I so much appreciate that. And so even if someone believes Moses is a different issue, because Moses is a different issue. But if someone believes that that basically almost everyone in the Bible is a literary figure, that does not put that person outside of Orthodox Judaism. Now, I'm not saying such a person should be accepted as a rabbi or a teacher or anything like that. The question is, has this person stepped outside of what is considered, like, is this person a heretic? And ultimately, no. So when it gets down to people as fringe as Melchizedek, right? I am perfectly fine. I have zero compulsion whatsoever.
Right, to say one way or another how we understand that character.
Well, with the idea that which is an idea that is brought down, that Melchizedek is actually a title.
Actually, a type?
A title.
Oh, a
Mel-
title. Yeah. King of Righteousness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That it was a title, and everyone as he says, Jacob, you're almost there. Come to the dark side.
Does he mean Christianity? Is that what Hezi is saying?
The dark side?
Yeah.
And I have to clarify for everyone that actually Hezi's not half the heretic I claim he is. He actually believes in God mostly.
No.
Yeah.
I was asking if you had any information on Melchizedek from Jewish sources that maybe I have not come across yet.
I would be very surprised, because I am guessing you did what I would do if I was doing a project like that, which is so Chezi says the red line is Sinai. I could believe that. I mean, that Moses, Sinai, that all of that gets into thing, but Melchizedek, I'm guessing you did what I would do, which is go to Savaria and put in Melchizedek in the search bar and take it from there.
I mean, let's be honest. We all have to have a starting point, and that was Wikipedia.
Okay, well, Wikipedia works, but
Mikhail, hello, Mikhail.
So,
hello, Mr. Sartori. How you doing?
busy, but gotta jump in when I can. When you guys start
Were
talking
you
about all sorts
listening?
of weird stuff. What?
Were you listening, or are you just jumping in?
Yeah, I caught up on double speed. So
Aha. So what are you going to correct me on?
Excellent.
well, I mean, I would say I think your criticisms of whatever Jesus and all that stuff is the Roy Clauser explanation kind of covers those ones. But
Who's Roy Clauser?
the guy that Christian Baxter talked to and then Paul talked to, the old 80-something-year-old philosopher, theologian guy. But
he does not. He's not ringing a bell. But okay.
Well, he'll make you upset because he says that Luther and Calvin had the right view of God and all the.
Oh, him. Yeah, I forget what I answered. I did comment on PBK's stream with him.
Jacob blacked out while screaming, so he can't remember what he said.
Honestly, I just found him not very credible or interesting.
That's fine. I mean, I didn't really care. I don't really. I did want to go back to the metamodern thing because I kind of feel like that. Because I put out videos a long time ago before anybody knew about Brendan Graham Dempsey. And
Michael posted it before it was cool.
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
Because so Damien Walter, the sci-fi podcast guy, he was talking about it and stuff. And I would say, because the best way, because it's supposed to be a broad thing. It's basically, modernity got it super narrow. Postmodernism went too far the other way with the subjectivity and the relativity. The metamodernity is somewhat assuming there is true things. There is something there that's definite, but it's fuzzy and we can't necessarily pinpoint on it. Which, Brendan, I would say, is in some ways my critique of him is you have to make room in your metamodernity for the fundamentalists or whatever, or I would even say just your view to just say, well, I believe it because this is what the Bible says. Not care because at a certain point, it's I will not care what the text critics think because I fundamentally think that their motivation was bad. In the whole thing, why is it that we just should be skeptical about everything that people wrote. Like either we're saying that they were all liars or that they were all stupid, right? That's like the viewpoint
Or
of ancient man.
the thing for me with skepticism is it's not good enough for you to tell me what I should not know. If you're criticizing the information there, or like back to the woman caught in adultery, right? Where did you get the idea that Jesus didn't say that? Right? Okay, you have established to me that it was not in the original Gospel of John. I'm fine with that. How does that mean suddenly that this wasn't some saying of Jesus which did get incorporated later?
It was floating around independently, and someone decided, where would be a good place to put that, and just did.
I mean, that's what the marginalia originally was. Somebody was like, here's a story of Jesus, and he wrote it next to the gospel.
Yeah. Like for all we know, John could have been there and he was saying, "Oh, I should have put this in my letter. Write this down." Like
I like it. I like it a lot.
I mean,
one of the things that I whenever I'm talking about midrash that I say is that when midrash was explained to me, it was the way that it was said was, if you believe everything that's in the midrash, you are a fool, and if you believe none of what's in the midrash, you're an even bigger fool. And so that's how I feel about the early traditions. Is I don't say that definitely happened. I don't say that it, but with some of them, I'm like, I have no reason to doubt that did happen. Yeah, Peter probably got crucified upside down. Fine. I'm not sure of it. But
and there's a question of relevance, right? So, is it Dr. Jim, the cardiologist? I think it's Dr. Jim. He was talking with Paul Vanderklay, and it drove me absolutely insane when he was talking about how he could not feel like he was truly part of his church because he's convinced that the book of Daniel is a forgery.
Yeah, that's weird. I've literally never gone to a church where I agreed with even like a quarter of the people there. I mean, that's just, I don't know.
I mean, okay, let's say the book of Daniel is a forgery. I don't believe it is. How that impacts life, the relevance.
It must
well,
be
you know what, Jacob?
Prophecies know too much.
I was just about to say that if Daniel was written legitimately, then that means that prophecy is possible, and we can't allow that.
Okay,
that's how we know that all the Gospels were written after the destruction of the temple, even though Matthew clearly says how to worship at the temple, like Jesus in Matthew says how to practice the sacrificial system, which would make
the book of
sense.
Acts is clearly dependent on Josephus. It couldn't have known something that Josephus would later know by its own independent means. It clearly also knew that the temple would have to be destroyed, even though the narrative clearly comes to an end in 63 AD and doesn't continue to the exciting stuff that happens next. Clearly written at least 100 years later. Yeah.
I want to mention this because I just finished reading the book of Acts with my dad, and my dad has not read the Bible seriously, and so we went through Acts chapters by chapters together. And when we got to the end, he just went, "Wait, that's the end." It is very clear to me that Acts was written while Paul was still alive, because that was my dad's reaction.
It was written when the events come to a close.
No.
It's like reading a newspaper article.
That is obviously not what happened. Sam loves my theory and my explanation of my theory. If anything other than my theory had happened, somebody would have annotated, written to the end of it. There would be at least some extended versions of Acts. But The fact is, what really happened was Paul went to Rome, he recanted and was appointed the governor of Spain. And because that was so embarrassing and known to everyone, nobody wrote anything about it for decades because it was too embarrassing for Christians to talk
All right,
about.
let's talk about Plato instead of Paul.
Oh wait, I do have.
Go ahead, Michael.
I do have a question for Sam because I think part of the thing is Brendan's obviously very high faith in the world of academia and all that stuff, and you hear things that you hear people.
Bart Ehrman has never told a lie. Maybe
Yeah.
Jesus has, but Bart Ehrman hasn't.
So because the way I see it is that if we are going to embrace a metamodern worldview, not just really encompassing everything, we should be a little more open-minded about the academic process and the scientific process and stuff like that. So here's my question, because you can answer this, I think, pretty well. Answers in Genesis has a guy that works for them who graduated from Harvard with a PhD. Can you get a PhD from Harvard without actually understanding the position of the consensus evolutionary views on things?
I mean, one could become the president of Harvard and not understand very much of anything at all.
That's good.
But
I'd say he's about our age. So,
Sam, that was a very good joke. That was a very good joke.
Sam, you gave me the perfect thing for my new sound effect.
could one graduate from, what did this answer from Genesis guy get his PhD in? What discipline?
It's something around genetics and biology or something. He's a geneticist guy.
I mean, it would be impossible, really, probably, to get a PhD from Harvard in something vaguely biological and not be pretty up to date on all the Darwinian latest evolutionary biology stuff.
Could Harvard produce an academic so stupid not even they could graduate him?
I think, Harvard is weird. It still has this thing going on where it is that old Harvard and what everyone thinks Harvard should be still kind of is there in parallel to the thing that produced the president of Harvard.
Yeah.
Some of the absolute smartest, most accomplished scientists on planet Earth are there, and some of the most pathologically parasitic, useless hunks of trash are also there. It's weird that way.
Which was the case at old boarding schools too, where the kids graduated at the highest of academic standards, or they paid their way through and were absolute idiots.
Well, that's what legacy admissions are.
Well, I don't think that guy was one of those. So, I don't know. Just because I hear people dismissing, and it's this guy believes in young Earth creation, but he went to Harvard, and it's he just faked his way through Harvard or something, and he just went there to get the name, and he didn't actually learn anything. And he said that he learned good disciplines of how to do studies and things while he was there. So.
It's possible that one could be sort of a theological renegade and go through the motions while at Harvard. I could imagine doing that. You'd have to be smart, and you would have to have really rock solid commitment to those sorts of convictions for something, because that wouldn't be entirely easy.
Okay.
But one could do start as a 6-day creationist, but you'd have to be giving answers to tests and exams and papers and stuff like that you probably didn't agree with, to kind of get the answers right, even if you think they're wrong.
You have to know the position.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the point I'm saying. Because that's if somebody goes through that and then they still think, well, I think that this other hypothesis has value and is worth, because to me that's just the weird thing. I think it is a spiritual thing, because there was a thing one of those guys who had a theory about testing rocks in the Grand Canyon, where he's saying okay, you have all these layers, and the layers all bend like, at the same like point. And his theory was that if you test it, it would either have to say they were all laid down in rapid succession and then they bent while all the layers were still soft. That's the like young Earth view. Or that these layers were put down over many thousands of years or whatever, and then if they bent, it would create a huge amount of heat, like the friction of it happening, and so you would be able to test that. And eventually, he went in there and did that, but he had to like fight through all this red tape of like every year they let thousands or hundreds or whatever of geologists into the Grand Canyon to do tests, but because he worked for like this Christian organization, they all these people tried to keep it from happening, and so it's like, well, if you think the scientific method is going to disprove his hypothesis because you're so confident, why wouldn't you just let him do the experiment? Like, why would you? So it's just a weird things about the motivations behind all the work. Like, because if stuff stupid pseudoscience, wouldn't the best way to get rid of stupid pseudoscience be to do good experiments?
Well, I mean, it is still the case that probably the best way to become an accomplished academic is to turn against your field and come up with some new theory and be able to have good experiments that demonstrate that. Like, a lot of the people who got to Harvard did do that sort of thing. But then there's also some questions are politically charged, like obviously like global warming, CO2, and temperatures is probably something that you can't question. But in some like more obscure thing like biochemistry or something like that like no political person really cares about, if you come up with some new theory and have some new exciting research and stuff like that, that's the easiest way to catapult your career into the higher levels of academia. So it's like science works best when there's less religious or political attention on the discipline.
My problem is that when people take science and try to use it to determine what their theology is, right? So if Omphalos was just something people had come up with after all of the problems, it would be qualitatively different than me looking at the Talmud from 1500 years ago and it espousing that idea of creation explicitly. Like, that's just, it's qualitatively different from apologetics.
Okay.
I do think there's something in there, but I would say that when I first became open to the possibility that the world was older was when I came across medieval Jewish and Christian sources that were okay with the possibility of the days of Genesis also all being 1,000 years. Like, and then I started thinking to myself, oh, okay, so some of the perspectives are rather new. And then I was a little more open to that, but I still had a lot of the information that I think Michael came across, and I'm like, so now I just don't care.
But that's important, that your religion not just be the current thing. Because if it's indistinguishable from the current thing, then what's the point?
Mm-hmm. But it's also interesting, David, that the way that our changing our mind is connected to our trust networks. And that if there's someone inside your trust network that is signaling this is a trustworthy person who is not threatening to my worldview and my existential whatever, and they disagree with me on that point, it can be much easier to listen to them than secular academic Bart Ehrman or Harvard geologist or whatever, who seems like they might be part of some principality or whatever that's an enemy of your principality or something like that, and outside your trust network. And that was really important for me, changing my mind on some of these evolution creation questions, was not just being at an Ivy League, academy surrounded by people who disagreed with me, but by being at a place where there were Christians who disagreed with me, who I otherwise trusted. That was way probably more influential than my professors.
Yeah.
And you could
see the rest of their lives.
Yes. Yeah. And they were like in my Bible study, or I would pray with them, or they would pray for me and be nice to me and do otherwise Christian-y things. But it's like, oh, and do you think that? Huh? Well, now you have my attention, right? And my vulnerable attention, not my defensive attention.
If they were doing heroin and having sex parties, you'd say, "Aha, see, evolution causes sex parties and heroin."
You reminded me of something I've been meaning to ask you about for a long time.
Do you have any heroin? Sorry.
I'm working hard on getting a drug house off my block right now, actually, so I could get one quite easily.
Paul has probably the strongest connections to whatever substance that he would be a very good resource if you actually really wanted to acquire something.
Sam, you had a lot of respect for that Christian who was working for NIH,
Francis Collins.
Yeah.
Ooh, yeah,
that's being a really horrible human being.
Ooh.
Like, is he still like respected in Christian circles?
It depends if you ask Bethel McGrew or not.
Why? What she said?
Why is he a really horrible human being?
Because of what he did with lockdowns. Like, morally, he's an
he was probably one of the 3 most influential people on how the COVID epidemic was handled, basically.
For the Trump administration?
For both administrations, for Trump and Biden.
That's what's funny about this election is everybody's going to blame Biden for COVID. It's like, Biden.
This is okay, but the letter of him talking about the Barrington Reef declaration, like that. When I saw that email, I was like, "How is this man a Christian?"
Well,
it's interesting because he was really good friends with Christopher Hitchens, and he so Francis Collins, yes, reading books like this one and other books by Francis Collins were really helpful for me when I was around 19 or 20 and wrestling with science and faith questions pretty intensely, because he was, extremely influential and also basically an evangelical Christian by all other markers. And he wrote some good books, like The Language of God, still a good book. I would recommend it, honestly, still. But his complicity in all of that COVID lockdown stuff and his undermining of science and just like totalitarian bureaucratic machinations and stuff like that was creepy. And I don't know exactly how to interact with that.
I have to show this email so that people understand what we're talking about. This is an email he wrote himself.
How about use reader mode on this? Like, I hate that internet.
What are you talking about?
No, it's on.
Paul hates the internet. Confirmed.
Okay. Hi, Tony and Cliff. See Great Barrington Declaration URL. This proposal from 3 fringe epidemiologists, these are not fringe epidemiologists, who met with the secretary, seems to be getting a lot of attention and even a co-signature from Nobel Prize winner Mike Leavitt at Stanford. There needs to be a quick and devastating published takedown of its premises. I don't see anything like that online yet. Is it underway, Francis?
I know, that is like the creepy baloney that everyone thought was going on. It turns out is, right?
Wow.
This man is a Christian?
Well, this gets into the whole issue of integrity in people and consistency. So one of the great examples is John Howard Yoder. John Howard Yoder in the 70s was like the preeminent Mennonite theologian. And in the background, he was, manipulating college girls to have sex with them and all sorts of things like that. But then you have the question.
Fruits.
Okay, then you have the question. What do you do with his theology?
Throw it away.
Or here's another person. What do you do with the theology of? So this is from the Francis Collins book, and it's sort of a collection of essays and stuff like that, right? One of the best essays in this book, and I was shocked, was how good of an essay Martin Luther King Jr. could write. Thought, honestly, all I have to say, I thought Martin Luther King Jr. was like a good social activist, but probably not a great theologian. It turns out that was not the case. he was an excellent theologian, and it's one of the best things. Like, this is like an all-star list of essays from, C.S. Lewis and Blaise Pascal and Thomas Aquinas, etc. And I remember reading it, and I'm like, that was fantastic. It was better than a lot of these people. It also turns out he was a chronic philanderer and terribly mistreated women, and who knows how many women he sexually abused or took advantage of or cheated with during his career, maybe in the hundreds.
And this is why, look, if the person is not, he cannot claim sanctity and holiness and insight into what it means to be godly if he does not embody that in his life.
The devil has insights into what it means to be godly.
I wouldn't want to listen to that.
Well,
what about King Solomon? I'm sorry, but what about King Solomon?
What about?
Do you want to trust someone who builds idols in the land of Israel?
So okay, you have to understand our view of those sins is very, very different than the Christian one. No, it's not. No.
Yeah, look, I know
you know what I'm going to say. He who said that David sinned is mistaken. That was because he's forgiven for. You haven't heard that quote before? One of the most famous quotes from the Talmud.
Sorry.
He who says David sinned, he who says David sinned is mistaken. Or literally the quote is, has nothing but mistakes in his hands.
Wow. Even though poor David couldn't build the temple because he had blood on his hands.
So the simplest explanation is once a person repents, their sins are no more.
Well, how do you know Francis Collins hasn't repented?
I hope he has. That's why I was asking you.
Mm-hmm.
Has he at least apologized?
I don't think so. But it also begs the question how much people, even at the very top, were sort of bought into the pandemic and their response being a good thing. Like, I genuinely think he thought he was making for the greater good level decisions. I think he's been shown to be scientifically wrong on that front. But I would suspect that emails from like mid 2020, fall 2020. I would suspect that he thought he was making for the greater good. This will save lives and prevent the spread of disease in his own mind and motivations.
I'm sorry, but the response to the Barrington Reef Declaration was completely inexcusable in a moral scientist.
I think
Judge
that
Jacob.
actually...
That's what we should rename the channel. Judge Jacob. Judge Jacob's Corner.
Well, I think that definitely one of the things that is the parts of modern Christianity that probably we'd be better off without is the complete loyalty to the kind of sacred secular split when it comes to things like work, because I'm sure he probably just didn't think that him being a Christian had anything to do with his work, because why would it? Because that's just how it was.
I think this conversation inadvertently is actually somehow coming back to the idea of metamodernism, because one of the big themes is death of the author within modernism. And that's what we're trying to figure out right now. Like, how much do we have to take in any of the credibility of these people? Like, do I really have to contend with the ideas of John Money? Do I have to is that the frame that we're going to understand anything in? Or how
one of my textbooks just cited him as an authority left and right.
Right. But the same thing with Foucault and Derrida. These are the people who you want to listen to. Like, if we're going to get into canceling, I mean, and that's kind of the idea of canceling, I think, is getting at what Paul was talking about. Canceling is the idea of there's so much inconsistencies here that I don't even need to think about this anymore. I don't have to bring in everyone's ideas, and I certainly don't need to bring in theirs.
in the Orthodox world, when talking about the difference between a yeshiva and a university, this story is often told, and I think it's true, which is a professor of ethics was found to be doing something disgusting, and he said, "If I were a mathematician, would you expect me to be a triangle?" Yes, we expect you to be a triangle. If you're teaching ethics, we expect you to be a triangle.
Well, that was Dallas Willard in his book, his book on the Sermon on the Mount, opens with this argument that this woman was in a school, back to Harvard. This woman was in a school, an ethics class in Harvard, and she was poor, and so she was cleaning the rooms of a lot of her fellow students, and they just kept hitting on her. And she's like, this ethics class is bogus because the ethics class isn't producing ethical people. And then that begins to get into Dallas Willard's argument about what Christianity is about, et cetera, et cetera. So.
This is interesting. So I'm reading a lot of Basil the Great. Hello, can you hear me?
Yep. Go ahead.
I'm reading Basil the Great because Hank and I are doing him for the moment. And one of his defenses of the Trinity, interestingly, is like, because he's a holy person who sort of ascended to the top of the mountain through asceticism and being, righteous, he has greater insight and authority to these questions than those people who haven't. And that has garnered him some amount of sort of mysterious trust. And that's just such a counter-modern way of thinking, that the morality of the person and the holiness of the person would grant them greater insight into the truth. And we're like, whatever, you could be an academic who studies the Trinity and could be a complete terrible person on the side, but your arguments need to stand on their own merit despite your own personal life. And Basil's, making the exact opposite claim.
It seems like it's probably an inverse correlation. I mean, isn't that the thing that got the monk that was always flying off? Like, he was kind of a simpleton or whatever. The simple Christians are the holy ones, right? It's these brains get in the way of knowing right and wrong.
Well, Donald Trump, we're going to have that for the election. The guy is a reprehensible human being in a whole variety of ways. And, and this is what drives mainline Christians crazy, because evangelical Christians threw a fit with Bill Clinton, and now you got Donald Trump. It's like,
okay,
hey,
to requote, the reason you got Donald Trump was people said, really, if that's the game you're going to play, then we'll play it too. I think people kind of say, oh, look at the hypocrisy without looking at the chain of causation and timeline.
I guess what Jacob is trying to say is that, in the words of the Talmud, if you say that Trump sins, you lie.
I did not.
You have nothing but mistakes in your hands.
David, I need to know how to say your last name, because you've been doing such great stuff, and I don't know how to pronounce it.
Booz-a-till.
Booz-a-till.
Yeah.
Booz-a-till.
Maltese. It's not exactly Smith, is it?
No.
My dad is one of 3 brothers, and all 3 of them pronounce it different in English. So, the Busatills are in Michigan. There's the Busatills, Boozatills, and Busatills. I'm a Boozatil.
All right, I'll try to remember that.
How do you say it in Maltese?
Busutil.
I also want to say, Brendan Graham Dempsey does not get to own Metamodernism. And I think that too many people are now being like, well, Brendan Graham Dempsey said metamodernism is this, and I don't think that's right, so then I must not be a metamodernist or something like that. Just because someone is, championing the label doesn't mean they get to own it. And so I think that there needs to be a somewhat we need to split the author. We need to separate the author from the work a little bit when it comes to him.
Well, he's been a hot girl in the corner for a while, so
there is that, but there's a reason why I titled this and why Post Platonism is better. I think post-nominalist Neoplatonism, which is what Vervaeke called it, is more descriptive.
Yeah.
But who's going to understand it? At least metamodernism is an empty bucket that you can sort of fill in with what you want.
Well, it was, that's what it was. I heard it more on Damian Walter's thing, talking about Spider-Man. Like, which actually is pretty easy, because it's like, okay, modernism, Peter Parker is Spider-Man, a white man. In postmodernism, Spider-Man is a black woman, or a trans person, or a pig, or whatever. And then, the modernists will say, that's not Spider-Man. And then in the metamodern, there's millions of Spider-Mans, but they all have to have been bitten by a spider, and they have their aunt die, and that's how you know, like, what a Spider-Man is. So,
Uncle Ben, their uncle dies.
yeah, right. Well, now in the new one, it was the aunt. The latest one was non-historian Tom Holland.
If people would just listen to me talk with Vervaeke, they'd realize I already solved this whole problem. Just solved all of it already. All we need to do is connect evolutionary psychology with Aristotelian final cause, and then we're done. Solved it.
Your conversations with Vervaeke have been absolutely excellent.
Yeah.
At the same time, like,
you don't think I fixed the whole thing?
Neo-meta post-Platonist.
That's a joke. Although it's
I
still...
do, but like, what do we call? I am perfectly fine if we're going to be called the biblical Unitarians. I consider myself a biblical Unitarian.
That brings people's defense mechanisms up in a way I'm trying to like sneak around. You can't raise people's defense.
Jacob loves people's defense mechanisms. He lives to trigger them. Watch me press this button.
But I think that, like, in all sincere, I'm going to try and be sincere and authentic at the same time. Post-authentic sincerity, or whatever the right combination of those things,
which might result in the death of this author. Continue.
It resulted in the death of Jesus. Paul, you should also listen to Paul Anleitner's embracing the cringe stuff on metamodernism. It's like I think he's basically trying to come up with a way of articulating a post-authentic sincerity, right? That's what you've been talking about. Yeah, how do we be sincere again? But we can only be sincere in a way that we know that we're choosing to be sincere, which is different than the old kind of being sincere. But but it's still an attempt at sincerity, right? Yep. Yeah, it's post-aware sincerity. And Paul Antliner's embracing the cringe videos have been really good about that stuff. So I'll send
that's the thing with like WWE having its like biggest year ever too. Everybody knows it's fake now, and they love it more. And the people are doing it. It's all the things that everybody ever wanted it to be. So,
well, I feel like in some of my greatest moments of spiritual insight into my own life is you almost have a meta experience, because you actually can see, like, sometimes truthfully, what a moment will mean to you in the future, in the present. When you have an experience and you're like, oh, this is going to be one of the most important moments of my life. And you know it, not in hindsight, immediately. Like, you can be, Grimm talks about the idea of no longer being an audience member. But I think in some of the most profound moments of our lives, we can see our lives while we're living them simultaneously. It's not like the audience part allows us to have a further reflection on it, I think.
I think that's true.
What room is that? Is that your garage, Paul?
Yeah, I'm doing laundry.
Oh.
I just put my family on the airplane. The kid is married.
Great.
Yeah, I'll have to get all of my work done in the second half of the week. But
Paul, can we get your? I haven't. If you've already done this, What is your first reaction to the Grail Country streams? Have you finished them yet?
I want to know why 11 hours and like 54 minutes. Is that a StreamYard?
It cut us off at that point. We went on for another hour. I was there at the end of the first one.
Oh, no. We went on for another 5 hours. It was
that's right.
Hour stream.
All I can say is Jacob is a prophet. He was right all along. When will I listen to him?
Is Saul also among the prophets?
It's happening. Jacob's vision is happening.
When Paul is right, he's right. And when he's wrong, he's wrong.
Speaking of Post Platonism or whatever, Paul, you're talking to Vervaeke again sometime soon?
Next week.
You're talking about you're going to be talking about Hermes stuff?
Yeah, and a lot of IFS stuff. I'm reading the others within right now. It is a fascinating book.
I'm curious to hear more. And what I felt like I don't have really the strong enough relationship with Vervaeke to push him on the Hermes stuff. I feel like you have a little bit more of the social capital to do so.
So Strawn sent me to his recent post with Christopher Mastro Pietro and the guy from France. And he's, John, that Jesus seminar really had a big impact on John. And people will be on different sides of what they think about that impact. But he now sees, that whole group is turning totally relational, from sort of the scientific detachment, impersonality now into relational, imaginal. So,
which group are you talking about? Like Vervaeke's crew?
The Vervaeke corner.
Yeah.
And you listen to Christopher Mastro Pietro, it sounds like a philosophically informed Jesus revolution. Oh, here's Andrew, the lurker.
I prefer troller to refer to Andrew.
How does Vervaeke feel about how does Vervaeke feel about being called a gateway drug to Christianity, do you think?
He's fine with it. Well, that whole video was about the transition from religion that's not a religion, out, done, past. Silk Road, C.S. Lewis hallway, in, now. So, and relationality, now we know the truth by being in relationship. And, Christopher Mastro Pietro is sort of a Kierkegaardian personal relationship with Jesus, but a lot of real anxiety about Christendom and some of those issues. But that was especially the first half of that video was tons of stuff in it. But I just haven't had time to work on any of this stuff. So.
Do you think there's any connection to how John was stating that with the Christian idea that actually even in some forms of Judaism, you'll hear people say it's not a religion, it's a relationship?
Oh, that is exactly where they're going, which is what all of the ex-hippies said in the 70s. Christianity isn't a religion, it's a relationship. You could sort of take that and put that,
flip on perspectival Christianity. Perspectival switch off, perspectival switch on with regards to.
I think it's important whenever you quote hippies, you always have to end the sentence in the word man. That's important. So
it's a relationship, man.
Yeah, there you go. That's way better. This is more accurate.
So it's super interesting how they're evolving.
I know you've been busy, but there are some of us that are just waiting with bated breath for you to address this History Luther podcast monologues. When are those coming? Come on.
Stuff flows so fast through. Now I'm really digging in the others within, and just watching these secular therapists encounter demons and what they're doing with them. It's crazy. It is just crazy.
Lance, that was last month. We're at Battle of the Little Bighorn now.
Yeah, I'm in the middle of Battle of the Little Bighorn.
Paul, it was really good though, wasn't it? Come on, it was. I
love the Luther series. Do I agree with it? No, but there's and I think so. We're part of, I think, continuing to process the Reformation is we're beginning to critique some of our hagiographies in our own little corner. Calvin and Servetus, and Luther and his volatile personality. But again,
Servetus is coming. I'm reading through all of the works of Servetus, so we haven't finished that one yet. I will bring that one up to the fore with whatever power and influence I have, but it might not be till like winter.
On this channel, he is referred to as the holy martyr Michael Servetus. May God avenge his blood. And Grizz is saying something about some guy named Marzinski.
I referred to his channel a little bit in my video about the Slate Star Codex Scott Alexander thing. It's wild, the stuff on that channel. I didn't play any of it because you never know with YouTubers. You don't know if they're gonna get upset. But like, there's this woman talking about how she sees demons, and she's like a psych hospital nurse, and so she saw this girl in the store, and she could see these little demons clinging to her, and so she sort of pried them off. And no, the future is going to get super, super weird. Peugeot is right. It's going to get really weird.
Not if psychologists know where their limits are.
I have less confidence that psychologists know their limits than Francis Schaeffer knows his.
Collins.
Yeah, I agree.
I agree with you. You mean Francis Collins?
Yeah, Francis Collins. Sorry, Francis Collins.
I 100% agree with you, but that is what Fountain of Comfort is for.
Well, and I wonder just about within psychology, they've done statistics on if one of the things that makes people interested in psychology, this is not meant as any kind of shots fired, is if you've had psychological problems.
Well, when it's shots fired, everybody knows this.
Yes.
Anybody with any experience around psychologists see this.
But it's also related to why people enter ministry. There are people
absolutely.
who are deeply
That's true too.
disturbed. That if they weren't spiritually disturbed, they wouldn't try to become pastors. It's yeah.
And Paul, one of the things that's happened is the repopularization, going back to the acid test and everything else, of DMT, ayahuasca, all the weed culture, which is, all these weed shops everywhere. That opens up portals. You start dancing with principalities and powers, and now they're talking about the little gremlins and all this other sort of stuff. Like, it has opened up things, and then you add it on to the IFS stuff and everything else. You're right. Like, we're playing with things we have no idea what we're playing with, and it's going to unleash things we have no idea it's going to unleash.
Well, I think there's going to be two, and it sort of tracks on C.S. Lewis's observations. There's going to be two reactions to it. One, and even this book talks about it, says these unattached burdens, they deal a lot in confusion and fear. And I see that happening around the whole Vervaeke Hermes thing. It was like triggering fear. It's like, y'all better calm down a little bit. So confusion and fear. And so in many ways, many of these demons, they're like pests. They're pests. They're spiritual pests. But one of the interesting things about the book too is he is now sort of connecting demonic activity in a person's psyche and physical ailments, which again, and the thing is, if you're sort of used to dealing with this stuff from being immersed in the New Testament, you read this stuff and it's like, oh yeah, it's
or
like,
prosperity gospel faith healing.
Yeah,
they beat Bethel Church up there in Reading beat the IFS people to that connection by decades.
Yeah, but they had no status. They weren't scientists. So now the scientists are discovering unattached burdens. Don't call them demons. So, all right.
But probably more people have been to Bethel for healing than have done IFS.
Yeah, agreed with that too. And that's some of the confusion. And that's another bit of the confusion that modernity is putting away, because the flatness of the internet means that now suddenly, instead of sort of having the gatekeepers like Francis Collins, okay, we're gonna memory hole these epidemiologists so that we can keep our narrative going. It's just super hard to do that now. Now we're much more at the level of principalities, which are interesting other kinds of spiritual things, which are far stronger, but in another sense, we're also sort of used to dealing with that level because it's just been carrying on under the guise of propaganda and ideology and totalitarianism and all of those things. So, but it is, Peugeot is right. Things are going to get really, really weird.
Paul,
Well,
how much do you know about Hermeticism?
Not a lot. I know a lot of people are sort of sending me emails saying, make sure you study up on this before you talk to Vervaeke. I don't know. As you well know, Sam, conversations with John go the way they go. Mm-hmm. And it isn't necessarily my goal I'm just going to have a good conversation with John about this. And, even in the last 6 months, if you listen to this recent Voices with Vervaeke video that he put out with Christopher Mastro Pietro, and I can't think of the other guy's name. John continues to evolve. It's very interesting. It's also interesting that I don't think Jonathan and I have evolved anywhere near as much as John has. We're it's kind of in our places, but it's fascinating.
Well, you guys already know that Jesus is the one true way, so
Oh yeah, exactly.
Well, I think one of the things that's going to happen here, and what's happening, I think, whether it be estuary or what's going to happen, when you unlock all these things, they start going around you. And Jess really nailed it on the head. Is what these these relationships you have are really important. For example, sponsor, disciple leader, spiritual father, communities that know you. Because what Paul, is one thing's true. Sometimes it's a demon, and it's sometimes someone who's off their meds and is having a serious mental health issue. There's a difference.
Better believe it.
And your people know you. Like your people know you, they get a sense of, wow, something's going on with something with Lance spiritually here that seems discerned. It's discerned outside myself. Other people will say, hey, Lance, you're seeming a bit manic. Maybe you should take your meds. But that happens. That's why we need community, like with people we can trust who are for us, who are going to tell us the truth, because these things are real. And then yet it's not always a demon.
No. And even the book says, these unattached burdens are fairly rare. And that's been known. And you see it in Pentecostal circles, Pentecostal groups that just go hog wild, seeing demons everywhere. They very quickly lose status because they're just working. They're just misusing the model. And I mean, this was talk that we had even at Calvin Seminary in the 80s. Exorcisms are real. Demons are real. Most of the time, you want to know what's wrong with that person, all the usual suspects.
And I listened to something that was 2 women who counsel people with a dissociative identity disorder, what used to be called multiple personality disorder. But they were also Christian, and they were talking about how to integrate these altars, but at the same time, there also sometimes were other things that they were like, no. That's not a defense mechanism. That's a demon. Right?
And that comes through fairly clearly in this book. It's fascinating listening to this guy sort of create a new approach because of sort of what they're discovering. Because they had this dogma, which all of the parts are good. And then they begin to learn that there's some things in there that aren't good. And we have to really say that they're not good, and they have to leave. And of course, when you read a book like this, there's another filter, which is all of the stories that make the book. You don't have the stories that don't make the book, and you don't have, this one comes out only with, prayer. I'm not going to use the variant text on fasting, but gives too much aid and comfort to the big O Orthodox, but I'm teasing.
Look, some people have demons because they need to be gluten-free, okay?
Well, what's interesting is someone sneezes. Why do we say God bless you? Yeah, you know the history of that?
Yeah.
because demons were supposed to, after you sneeze, demons were supposed to sneak up in there. And this dude is writing about this woman who was in great shape, and then she goes into the hospital for this thing, and then she has some obese dude spirit, unattached burden in her that they discover, and it was causing health problems with her. And so basically they have to tell the spirit of this old guy who died next to her in the hospital room to get out of her, because, and and Sam, you mentioned it in the live stream the other day where, and they talk about it in the book too. It's just fascinating. Yeah, you sweep the house clean, and if you don't have something else in the house, other things wind their way in there.
Well, and it's also in scripture that the sun will not strike you by day, nor the moon by night. What is being moonstruck?
Yeah.
Within the context, moonstruck is influenza, is being a lunatic, right?
Yeah.
Like, we still maintain the idea that the heavenly bodies are causing sickness in this realm.
Yeah.
The lesser light can strike you.
That's fascinating. I'd never, famous passage, but I never. Well, you're doing amazing work, David.
Okay.
You're single-handedly saving Jacob's Corner. I really believe that.
David,
do you mean that literally, Paul? Do you mean
hesitu? Jacob's just the program promoter here.
Okay, since you brought up that verse, I have to tell the story. Some people will, who listen to my channel, will already know this. So we recite that that psalm in the evening prayers every evening, and my father told me that he spent, like, ever since he knew what the words meant when he learned Hebrew, he wondered, what does it mean for the moon to strike you at night? And when my dad was trying to leave Iran, so he had been caught once and gone to jail, and the second time he was traveling by night and sleeping by day. He had to walk across the mountains that border between Iran and Turkey, which was 3 days of walking. And he told me the night that they got to the border crossing, there was a valley, which was the demarcation between Turkey and Iran. And it was a full moon that night. And if you've ever been out in the middle of nowhere in a full moon,
you'll see a shadow from the moon.
You know how bright the moon is. And he said, I raised my eyes to the mountains, right? And he like recited that psalm, and all of his fear fled from him, and he just walked straight across.
That's good.
So someone was mentioning in the chat that the word for sun in Hebrew is shamash, which is also, if you've read the Epic of Gilgamesh, in the very beginning, Shamash, the glorious sun, endowed him with beauty. Like, it's the god Shamash endows Gilgamesh with attributes.
Sounds kind of modernist to me.
Well, isn't that why Genesis 1 says the greater light and the lesser light is to not use the words for sun and moon, which might have been confused with deities?
Oh.
I wouldn't say that's the final cause. It might be the efficient cause.
Sure. I appreciate your multi-level causality. That's very important for Post Platonism.
Are we going to survive this metamodernity labeling thing, or are we just stuck with it, Sam?
And we might be stuck with it for a while. Like the Tom Holland, Louise Perry conversation, which everyone should listen to.
Yeah, that was great.
that was called the New Religion. I'm not even done with it. I'm only 30 out of 42 minutes through it.
Well, that's definitely on the list.
That's a really good conversation. And Holland was talking about how they didn't even have a word for the Protestant Reformation for like 150 years.
Yeah. Well, look at Christianity in the first, in the second and third century. What was it?
The Nazarite, the way,
So Paul, when I first heard Tom Holland's testimony of his Marian apparition, I was like, Paul is going to be talking about this forever. Like it's just so perfect.
I actually haven't bothered to listen to it yet, but I will. Everybody sent it to me.
What? It
I
was
know.
Justin Brierly.
I know. Everybody sent it to me, and it's like, but I have this belief that actually for many of these things, when the time
It's
is
not
right,
Mary.
I watch them.
It can't be Mary,
Providence.
But Paul?
Yes,
But
Jacob.
Paul is ready. The video will appear.
No, that's the whole point. Like the way Tom Holland tells it is so perfect. Like I cannot imagine like if you had scripted it, if it was a better like scripted Marian apparition.
Well, you know me, Jacob, me and my Calvinism. Jesus, take the wheel.
But what if his mom takes the wheel? What then?
If Jesus has his mother drive, who am I to complain? Oh, now I lost. So my son got married, no longer lives with me. My other son just took a trip. Now I've just got the dog all by myself, so I got a lot of dog duties now.
Where's your wife?
You see that work? The original plan was the dog was supposed to go to school with her.
Okay.
Still hasn't happened.
Why?
Oh, she's now head teacher. She's got all these other responsibilities, and the truth is, a dog is an encumbrance. And I think originally she thought, well, I'll just have the kids help with the dog. But there's all these rules that you have to have an 18-year-old with the dog. And,
how old is the dog?
The dog's now a year. She just finished heat, finally.
If that dog at a year is she almost trained?
She's super good, but kids aren't trained. That's the
Yeah,
problem.
but that's part of the reason you put special.
I know, Jacob. I know we can argue about it, but I'm still in process. So now I just got the family off. My wife went to school in her slippers instead of her shoes. Her slippers are a lot like her shoes. So she's like, bring my shoes. So I got to run down to the school, bring the shoes. Haven't been to church in a few days. There'll be stuff there. We're fighting this drug house in the neighborhood now. It's crazy.
Did you exercise the house?
Not yet. I'm going to have Sacramento Police Department exercise it first.
I definitely recommend prayer.
Yes, but Paul is also a man under authority.
I can get pretty bold confronting people, but I'm not going to go up to the door of that drug house and kick it in, and that'll probably get me stopped.
No, I actually meant a spiritual exorcism, like actually just bless the house and
walk around it 7 times.
Yeah, there you go.
But where's my shofar?
No, so this actually happened. So at the convent I was interning at, there is a literal Satanist temple right next door. Literal Satanist temple right next door. And the one of the women in the shelter was actually spending money she should be spending on her kids' food on charms from this temple. And I was going out of my mind. Like I'm talking to Father Eric, I'm like, why don't we live in a world where like the Catholic Church can somehow like
Eucharist procession?
Yeah, like, dude, there should not be a Satanist temple like preying on women in a domestic violence shelter inside of a convent.
One thing that I think is going to get really on the things of the list that are going to get weird, the First Amendment needs to like figure out what it's doing, because a lot of what's getting weird right now is the definition between religion and not religion is shifting.
Right.
And so we have this non-establishment clause that you can't establish a religion, and that people have to be free to practice their own religion. And it's like, so what exactly does it mean to establish a religion? Is a public school, just as a random hypothetical to school board members that might be approaching the month of June, is flying a pride flag an act of religious, establishment at a public building?
Well, that's what the staff at the convent were saying. They're like, well, we can't forbid our people in the shelter from going to this Satanist temple. And I was like, well, why the hell not?
Good question.
Because people under a shelter don't have they're not subject to church discipline.
They're subject to shelter discipline.
Well, we do get government funding. For anybody who doesn't know Jules is the spiritual son of Father Stephen DeYoung, and Father Stephen's official representative on Fountain of Comfort. So, hello, Jules.
Hello.
Nice to meet you, Jules.
Nice to meet you, Lance.
Do you actually know the people here?
I've watched some of Sam's stuff. I've seen a couple of his debates with Father, and I've watched a couple of his videos. I know Andrew from a few of the chats. And then obviously I know you, Jacob, but that's about it. And then I know Paul Vanderklay, but he just left.
Well, he saw you and he's like, I gotta go.
Oh, no, because I was actually going to say hello, Dominique Vanderklay. See if it revealed my my associations or not.
Jacob, I have to go, but I'm going to say this before I leave. Tomorrow at your Bible study, we have to talk about the actual topic. You always set up the conversation, and it goes so much better when we leave wherever we start.
I mean, my Bible studies were famously known for being about anything anybody wanted to talk about, and
so it's an estuary meeting.
Yeah.
No, you've heard my bit about estuaries. It's a Protestant Bible study without the only redeeming quality of
the Apostle Paul.
Okay.
Without the only redeeming quality of a Protestant Bible study, which is the Bible, right? As long as you're gathered around the Bible, I don't care how you do it, what you do it, like that. It'll work itself out. But like that's one of the things I don't like about estuary is it. Every time I go, it just seems like a Protestant Bible study without the Bible, without any authority.
It's an estuary? I'm not familiar with this.
It's Dominique Vanderklay's project of getting people together talking, and it's an attempt at Paul says Van Donk is going to come after you for that, which reminds me I still haven't there are things I need to do. The doubtful that there are things I need to do. So estuary is an attempt to create the thing is, I think Paul thinks it's Jesus smuggling, but I don't think Paul really realizes that the sea monsters always win. Like ultimately, in an estuary, it's more salt water than it is fresh water.
So this is like an online Bible study kind of thing, but
no, it's in real life. That's the
in real life. Okay.
Yeah, that's actually the redeeming quality that it has. Is it's in real life. I'm actually doing something maybe somewhat similar, which is we're going to be drafting a Magic the Gathering cube for people who know what that is, because frankly, I don't like. I really don't like the entire format of Estuary. I've been supportive of it, very supportive of it, just because when Paul agrees to lead, I am supportive of his leadership. If he agrees to lead, I am supportive of his leadership. But I personally think the format is garbage.
Well, so what it is, Jules, it's not church, right? Which the beautiful thing about it not being church is you can have kind of those good faith conversations that, I mean, for example, if you're going to have an official church event, then there's certain parameters, like there's certain things you got to live within, and so on and so forth. So it's a place for people to gather, much like on here, and have good faith conversations with folks. And it's where kind of people do some of the sense making that you kind of, I don't know if you've watched any of the Just Chattings or whatever. So that's the place for them.
So it's like a Christian quorum without Bible study. It's just a quorum.
Well, but the fact is, like most of the people that are the leaders and everything else, I mean, the lion's share of them are Christian, right? But one of the things you have to find out in Estuary, having seen this, is like sometimes Christians are the ones you have to turn off because they have an answer for everything, and they're trying to proselytize and convert everyone. I mean, to some extent, and so. You want people to ask those really hard questions that maybe in certain church contexts they just don't feel like maybe they've asked the questions and they've told to quit asking the questions, or they ask the hard questions and they're not getting a deep, an answer that's satisfying to them, or some of those other sorts of things. And I think here's where I think Estuary can play a role. It's not church. In the same way that I think that people can come many people, for example, in 12-step groups, AA would talk about if you use the name of Jesus and it was just a Jesus program, a lot of people would not even walk in the door because they have problems they have all sorts of angles with Jesus. They want nothing to do with that or whatever, and so on and so forth. So they strip the language out. One of the things that's I think inevitably it's going to happen with Estuary, but once people come, even if they had a hang up with Jesus, once they come and start following the spiritual path, where do they end up? A lot of them end up back in some sort of church context. They end up believing in Jesus, right? So I think a lot of folks coming into Estuary, because I believe when you ask all the ultimate, deepest questions, what are you going to run into? You're going to run into God. And when people are trying to make sense of things, and when the world isn't making sense, and they want to have good faith conversations, at the end of the day, I think if you ask all the deepest questions there are, you're going to run smack dab to the end of any of these other kind of ideologies, materialism, scientism, whatever it is. And then ultimately you're going to run, because what people are fundamentally doing is they're seeking God, right? So yeah, I mean, if you're the Jesus people, or if you're a Jewish person who's in that estuary, at the end of the day, at the end of these questions, you're going to run into God, right? So those are some of the things that happen. But I think estuary is the place for all these nuns and all these peoples that have left, where they can come in and start asking some of these more difficult questions, try and do some sense making, and then what will happen in the same way what happens in a 12-step group is people end up going to church. They still go to the AA meetings, but they end up going to church too, right? Okay. So what will happen in the same way that people started following Peterson and Pajor or whatever, ultimately what happens, if you're a father to young, like I ran into countless young guys that watch Peterson or Pajor or whatever, and then they walked into the Orthodox Church. And I'm like, hey, what brought you here? And they're like, oh, I was watching Jordan Peterson, or I listened to Lord of Spirits podcast, right? Or Josiah Trenum, or you know all the likely suspects.
Yeah,
right?
I'm aware.
Yeah. So I think that as far as that, I think one of the things that I know John has kind of realized is there in real life is really important, but also there is a need for some sort of online part. There's a need for some sort of online thing, and I think that's because we've come through Paul through YouTube, right? And not everyone's going to be in a city where there are enough people to do estuary. So it's a mixture of both. I mean, clearly having in real life estuary groups makes a heck of a lot. Sam is a part of a very successful one in Chicago.
Although we're curious because we predate estuary. We're like one of those early breakoffs from the tree that is. I'm not quite sure. I normally, when I tell normies what I'm doing on that night with like a friend or a family member asks like, what are you doing? I say I'm going to my podcast discussion club. And they're like, oh, okay, that sounds like a normal thing that an average person might do. I go to a book club, you go to a podcast club, you like podcasts, I like books. Great. Jacob, you're on mute if you're trying to say something.
I should unmute myself. Do you actually use the estuary protocol John came up with?
Kind of. We pick and choose, and also one difference is our group has a really strong core membership that has been doing this for years, and it can kind of feel a little tedious to do the whole thing when most of the people there are returning people who know each other and have like a multi-year conversation going. And we kind of do a version of it when we have new people. Which actually, honestly, the last couple months, most months we have had new people. I have no idea how people find us. Like we almost anti-advertise at this point because we're kind of at the size where we would have to break up into two groups if we got too much bigger. But I don't know, we're a little bit different, I think, sometimes than estuary. We're more of like a philosophical religious conversation group that kind of knows that we've all been watching and paying attention to the same stuff, sort of like this, right? Like I can say, oh, hey, did you see that Tom Holland video? Oh, half of you, yes, half of you, no. Okay, well, Jules likes Lord of Spirits. Okay, I can quote Lord of Spirits, and like probably you guys mostly know what I'm talking about, right? Like when you have that shared knowledge that each other are coming from a very strong, shared context of what you want to talk about, you don't really need the estuary protocol, and it almost feels kind of like forced and tedious to do it every week or every month.
I agree with Sam there, because my community, like Archangel Gabriel, we don't really have like this didactic side kind of structure. It's more like we all kind of just meet up, and then in the course of normal conversation, we might bring up, oh, hey, did you see this? Or, hey, there's something relevant that, one of us might want to talk about that's, theological or philosophical of some degree. And then we kind of have it more organically. I can see how, like, a structured kind of once a month meeting over a general topic can be useful for some people, especially considering how stratified, modern sort of communities have become.
What I don't like about it is that people self-select. They're the type of people who like sitting around and talking about things.
Yeah.
And the people who actually need this type of thing the most are the people who are not comfortable talking, who don't have experience, and are unlikely to be very effective. Like I could go to estuary and hijack every group every week, and like there's almost an aspect of me not going to estuary so I don't ruin it, right?
Yeah.
And that's part of why I was thinking either a hike, where you can just hike along and people talk and people, maybe you talk with one person, or maybe the entire group that's hiking. Like, I don't know if you've ever been on a hike with 5 or 6 people, right? But sometimes all 6 people are talking about the same thing, and sometimes you have 3 groups of 2, right? or something like Magic the Gathering, or I mean, one of the reasons I thought it was important, like these discussions we have on YouTube as opposed to just on Discord, is yeah, there are lurkers. There are people who are they are not the type of person to ever even put comments in the chat, much less come and be on a stream like this, who deeply want to be able to listen and participate in their own way, which is just to consume the content. And Estuary doesn't allow at all.
Every level. Yeah, I think you need but see, it's not an either or, it's a both and, right? It's all the things. And so like what Sam and those guys are doing, they don't have to call it estuary. What they are doing, they're having conversations in the spirit of PVK, BOM, TLC type conversation. Would you agree with that, Sam?
I just want to make sure. So Chezi, Christian Baxter doesn't do live streams, does he? Is this a live stream?
Sure.
I assume they're recording a conversation for future.
Okay.
Yeah. The one thing that I do think about the protocol, Sam, that I think you make a really good point, Jacob. One of the things that the protocol does allow for, particularly for introverts and other folks, the way you go around, it ensures that everyone has a chance to share. And then when the group also gets to pick on what you talk about, like, so Jacob, you think, if you were to go, you could draw out your topic. If no one wants to talk about your topic's not going to be initially talked about. Also, the thing that happens in a good group setting, and this is where you kind of do have to have some leaders, and this is the tough thing, is a good leader in any small group with the person who's dominating the conversation knows how to say, hey, Jacob, really appreciate it. We've heard from you all night. How about we give someone else and I would say, like, someone like,
hey, Hank, put a trap on it, Hank, and let someone else talk.
Clear jets,
you need a leader to do that. And the fact is, I hope anytime I've been at Estuary, that's never, now as a clinical social worker, I'm leading groups professionally. So hopefully I'm not actually the example of the bad person, but it takes a very skillful person to lead a group like that. And at the same time, a group has this is what I call the Protestant flattening of everything, right? I'm sorry, like, you need hierarchy and you need to be able to have different people play different roles. And in Estuary, supposedly everybody's equal, although obviously there has to be a leader.
I do think that there are folks who are called out, and generally it's people who start it with, they're absolutely is leaders. They're trying to do some, like, if it's going to actually be what its best self, right, Jacob? It would actually find people in a locale that had the gifting to be able to actually run a small group and get a little bit of training. They kind of show them how things are doing well. But I'm with you, and this is the thing that I've made the comment on all the time, which is I think in real life Estuary is great, but we need to keep doing these things online too, and then we need to do these public things online, like you say, because people are watching this and can have metanoia moments watching these live chats. Other folks are going to want to go offline. I'm really excited. Tayo and David B and Tunji and others are really hanging out in the BOM Discord voice chats here lately. So now I'm jumping in there, and there are really interesting conversations that are going on there. So I think you're right, Jacob. People are going to participate at a lot of different levels. And so some people won't come in real life. That's okay. Others will. So you provide spaces for the in real life people who need that and want that. You provide spaces online for the people who need that and want that. And then the people will make the comments. Like Anselman is probably the most prolific commenter. Can we say I think Anselman is probably, I would say, the most prolific commenter in the TLC. Because he's everywhere. I see him with you, Sam. I see him over here. He's very tuned in. And so in that role, like, he is like the leader.
He's the super lurker.
And then there are other people. Yeah. Well, the super lurkers are the people who watched for 7 years and have never made a comment or touched into anything else. There are people like that too, and that's okay.
So, I mean, I really do want to highlight Cassandra's comment here. Would it be weird if I just sat there and listened? And estuary is a situation in which, yes, it would.
I do that
One
all
of the
the time,
things you
yeah.
could do there, I think, too bad Sam left. Like, I think one of the things when you get there in real life, like literally Cassandra, if you, for example, the KC, when Jess and I were doing it, if you showed up that, hey, I'd like to just, I'm just kind of getting used to this. I don't really want to talk a lot, but I'm interested in hanging out and listening. And then eventually I might want to talk or whatever, we'd say, absolutely, keep coming.
Yeah, but Lance, that already takes a degree of setting the agenda and asserting yourself that most true lurkers don't have. They're not going to come there and draw attention to themselves.
But look at that. Would it be weird if I just sat there and listened? I'd talk eventually. What Cassandra, I think, is saying is, hey, if I could come hang out, I might be willing to come and hang out. I might not want to talk right away, but eventually I may. So, like, for that specific instance of Cassandra, that's it. Also, like, for example, for like someone like my wife who's very introverted and also these sorts of conversations, she'd never want to go to an estuary, ever. And that's okay. Because it's for a specific sort of person. It's for the people, and we all know who they are when they show up. I got to get his name right. He showed up and he's been listening for years, and then he jumped into one of the long, mega live streams. And then he had all this stuff because he's been thinking about all this stuff and listening to us. And so as soon as he came on, like all this stuff started coming out because he, all the stuff he's integrated and all the things he wanted to say after all these years started coming out. He's like, oh, I'm sorry. We're like, no, keep going. Eventually some people come in, and those are the sorts of people that you need to provide that space for.
I mean,
and this isn't for everyone. Go ahead. And other people need to go to the fountains of comfort, right? And other people, it's fine if they just go to church.
Well, I'm kind of curious though. So like the goal of the estuary is just to like kind of endlessly talk and philosophize on this stuff, or is it really just to find some sense of community? Like what's like the end goal of the estuary?
Yes.
I think ultimately, I'm not going to speak for, I do not speak for estuary. Okay. So I don't speak for estuary. I guess I'll speak for what I've listened to Paul talk about, and then what Jess and I were thinking about, and so on and so forth. And I think I'll pull up this document Jess and I had. It's providing a space for people to facilitate sense making, right? And it also is getting people in real life, building relationship with one another through and having the conversations that have been happening surrounding Paul Vanderklay and the Bridges of Meaning Discord, that you're starting to see the sorts of conversations that are having here. People that have engaged in, they've watched Peterson, they've watched Peugeot, whatever, right? But nobody in their friend group can have this, like, nobody like their wife or their husband or their friends, they don't want to talk about this stuff. You know what I mean? And they want to find a group of people that can kind of have that. So what I do think, what I have seen is what's the end goal about this? One is we're very divisive. We can't talk about difficult conversations. We can't seek understanding of people. We're trying to just, colonize everyone. Like, can we provide a space where good faith conversations exist? I think that's one. Secondly, I think the end goal would be, one of the things that I've seen that's come out of all of this is there's been a lot of healing, Jules. You know what I mean? Like, people have integrated ideas. Maybe they were secular, or they've left the church, or whatever that looks like, right? And so all of a sudden, being exposed to Lord of Spirits podcast and Jordan Peterson and Jonathan Peugeot and Paul Vanderklay, it doesn't make a difference, whatever it is, right? And as you have some of this integration happen, and maybe you're opened up to something deeper that you never were exposed to in your church life or whatever, there's healing that goes on with that.
Well,
there's actual healing.
So this really does get into Fountain of Comfort, which is when I'm running clinical groups, like these are designated therapeutic groups, it's very obvious that some people just need friends. And this is what I get from a lot of therapists is there you have the you have two choices to make as a competent therapist. You can do the really hard work and get paid shit because the people who really need like actual therapy can't afford it and there's no money there. And it's really hard and they actually need therapy. Or you can make a ton of money being a rent-a-friend for people with first world problems, right? People who are really rich and in all forms of materiality, but lack community. And part of the hope of Fountain of Comfort is providing a structure where there can be a community that both recognizes, hey, you know what, this person, well, first of all, that recognizes, you know what, maybe this person has a demon. And it's not the place of the community or of a psychologist, a lay psychologist, to like exorcise people's demons. That like that's not what mental clinical therapy is there for, right? At the same time, recognizing, okay, there are things that require a professional's. I keep on talking about scrupulosity. So scrupulosity is a particular form of OCD which manifests as religious devotion. And the way, as a psychologist, you know whether it's scrupulosity or religious devotion is you ask their pastor, and their pastor's like, yeah, this has nothing to do with religion. This person has a different problem, right? And you treat it like you treat OCD, and suddenly they're actually more faithful than they thought they were before and much healthier, right? And being able to distinguish between scrupulosity and a faith that psychology can't understand. And look, just some people who need a church, right? Like, we've lost that hierarchy. We've lost that orientation and that capability of, yes, I don't like this whole fake church of the psychology industrial complex. It's really bad. Social workers as secular priests is horrifically bad, and that's what we have here in Los Angeles. And frankly, from what I hear, you have similar things even in Louisiana, because officially, like I was talking to Father Stephen about Child Protective Services, right?
Okay.
So in Los Angeles, we have much stronger child protective services willing to come in and take people's children away and tell them how to raise their children than you guys do in Louisiana. And it's in many ways broken, in more ways broken than a lot of people realize. But it's also broken in Louisiana because, like, nobody's asking Father Stephen, like, okay, Father Stephen, what is this situation like? And actually having community leaders be like, hold up here. This is a family. This is a situation where we as a community need to intervene into the sanctity of the family because these children are being maltreated. And because our society simply isn't set up to do that correctly.
Yeah.
Well, and I think, like, go ahead. I think things are things and they aren't things. For example, I think the community and friendship is a big part of why people think interact. Because, by the way, in real life relationships are really important for people, and people need that. Because you can say, "Oh, I'm fine" or whatever, but if you're in the same room with someone and you know them well, and they say they're fine, like I know you're not fine. And it's the same way of, like, let's just say 12-step groups or AA. That's a very specific, particular thing. And it's a spiritual program of action, and it helps heal a lot of things, and it does provide the community or whatever. However, even in the text, it says this, and in practice is this: hey, you also probably need to go seek the help of others for certain mental, medical, other conditions. Like we're just the amateurs over here. We know what we do well, but you also need to go out and seek the help of others, and so on and so forth. And that's
AA is not for everyone.
right. Well, it's only for people who have a
Recognize
desire to stop drinking. Yeah, and so absolutely, and so, but I'm just saying, as part of a group, you can't be all things to all people, and it's actually even the same for. I mean, listen. So my highest groups that I would participate in, like I participate in 12-step group, I participate in church, and I participate in the TLC. Right? If I have to nix one, I'm going to have to nix the TLC because those other groups are my higher order groups, to be honest with you, for me to be healthy and everything else. I'm blessed to have that. But what will happen, this again, we've already seen it happening. People will come in and start having these conversations or whatever. And eventually, and Jules, I'm sure you're probably seeing it where you're at. Like I invariably see, I would see a young guy walk in, never seen him before or whatever. And I'd meet him after the Divine Liturgy and just introduce myself, say, hey, what brought you here? And, the stories generally, they're kind of all the same. Something on YouTube, they've watched some people on YouTube and then maybe started reading some things, right? Whatever. And then they ultimately came down to their nearest Orthodox church. Or they're a young seminarian who's now been starting to read the Fathers, and then they're trying to figure some things out. But, there's like an 80 or 90% kind of rule that goes along with that.
Let's see.
And so
it depends. So usually people who are like in their 30s to 40s, they tend to watch more Pajot. That's usually how it turns out. Younger guys, it's Jay Dyer. There's actually one gentleman who's in his late 40s who was a big Jay Dyer fan who came to our parish because of that. So that is kind of the general stint. Some people just get disillusioned with wherever they're at. Other people just meet somebody. Myself, my situation was kind of weird. I didn't really I wasn't involved in any community. I didn't listen to Lord of Spirits or Pajot or any Peterson before I came. I literally just walked in, to my Orthodox parish completely biblically and theologically illiterate.
So what sparked you to walk? I'm curious, what sparked you to walk into the Orthodox church and not the, did you read something? How did you even find
how
out?
it went was in where I grew up, there was kind of just no one really knows that Orthodoxy exists. And amongst the Catholic people who do know, it's just Catholicism, but with Greek people. And that was kind of my conception growing up. And then I remember hearing someone, it was actually an interesting story. It was around high school. I was in marching band. So I was going into the band room and I was going to put my saxophone in my locker. And I remember overhearing, a girl saying oh yeah, I went to the Orthodox church. I remember at the time thinking, oh, that's funny. There's an Orthodox church in Lafayette, Louisiana.
It's about a girl.
No, I didn't date her. No, I dated her friend though, but I didn't date her. More or less, I remember her mentioning that, and years went by, but then randomly I would just think hey, there's an Orthodox church in Lafayette. And it would randomly kind of come into my head every once in a while, but I'd ignore it until 5 years down the line. And then it was right during COVID. It was right when the church I was at was pretty much shut down. For context, I was cradle Catholic baptized, but my mom converted to Baptist, so I went along with that for her. But I remember one day just, my pattern was kind of shooken up. And the only video I saw before I converted was Abbot Trifon had his where he talked about how he converted. And that was my first conception that oh, Orthodoxy is something you can convert to. And that was really all I knew going in. I mean, you could ask Father Stephen himself. I didn't have a clue about Christianity or even anything before I walked in the door. Because some people come in, they say oh, I wrestle with these certain theological points, or I went through all this complex scholarship and I've come to this consensus. But that wasn't really my experience.
Well, I
but
did ask.
you did watch an Abbott Trifon video, though, YouTube video before you walked in.
Oh yeah, but that was more or less just I knew that was something I could be received into. That was all I really got out of it.
Well, I actually did ask Father Stephen, and he says you still have no idea about pitching it.
Well, yeah.
Sorry, I just needed to do that.
Oh no, that's fine. Oh no, he's done worse to me.
No, thanks for sharing that, Jules. I'm just always so curious. I'm just always so curious how people find their way into the Orthodox Church. Just because for the past 4 years, I was just very raised Methodist, did the non-denom thing, went to seminary, was a house church pastor for about a decade, and then found my way into the Orthodox Church. So anyway, I'm just always so curious, and I've talked to a lot of young people, and I always ask them the question. I just like how people find their way there.
Yeah, I notice it tends to be more like there's some kind of theological revelation someone has through reading whatever sources they read, or it turns out to be political. Those are kind of the big things among like 20-something-year-old men.
And I think Father Young has a good answer for that, because he said this publicly, like, and actually this is a lot of priests are there. They're like, yeah, if you're coming here for some, like, if you think we're perfect, or if you're coming here, for some political reason or whatever, like, I mean, you need to come here, right? For Jesus. I mean, you need to come here for the, all those, like, you actually want to live this life and do this thing. And that's one of the things I do like that I have found, and I don't want to turn to this, but one of the things I do like about the Orthodox path in there is it's so much slower. Like, it's not to try and, baptize someone within 2 months of showing up within the church door, for example. So it allows people the room to kind of, figure their way into it, and, for whatever they are. And
well, it's not intellectual either. Like,
right,
I mean,
right.
Like, catechism isn't like, oh, you memorized all the acts of the councils, like all the canons, and you have a perfect understanding of all the theological ambiguum. It's more like catechism is assimilating you into the community, you learning that ways, you participating in like the nomos, the way of the people.
Yep. Yeah, it's so hard to talk to people about that, because like the conversations we have on here, like, yeah, a little bit, but my experience on actually attending at the Orthodox Church, like, and I've had a chance to be to primarily a Greek church in Kansas City, although I did spend some time in Antiochian church. I just recently moved down to Houston, and the Greek church is the closest church. The Antiochian churches are booming down here, Jules. Booming. Yes. Like, they're like Father Honeycutt. They're having to build another one. Like, it's crazy what's going on in St. George's, which is downtown. Which has a little bit more of an Arabic flavor to it, but still do mostly in English there.
Yeah, my parish has had a lot of growth in the last 4 years. So,
but like, the first thing when I walked in the door, basically, my Orthodox priest is like, I was talking about Father John Bear and all this other stuff. That's good. He's like, hey, why don't you read about Father Paisios or Saint Paisios and Saint Porphyrios, and just come to the services and start practicing the life. Like, it's like, oh, maybe you should think about fasting a little bit here, and,
yeah.
Oh, what are you doing on a prayer roll? Why don't you try this? And, it's just, it's like, literally the stuff that's talked about online when you actually go to the church is not what the priest is trying to get you to do.
Yeah. And I mean, that's, I guess, my warning about, to bring it back to the estuary thing, is that the estuaries, for what they sound like, it sounds like endless philosophy. It's kind of like labor without actually giving birth. So I'd warn that you're better off participating in a community, participating in a life, even if you don't have all this intellectual stuff like worked out. You're going to find that the meaning is found participating in the cycle,
Yeah, you're talking about hierarchies here now, though, right?
Yes.
Like, so I'm with you. So, like, when I said if I had to choose, like, for me, actually, it's a 1A and 1B because I'm a recovering alcoholic. Like, I have to for me, have to be a part of my 12-step group, and then I also have to go to church. Like that to me, those are foundational. Because if I don't have one, I don't have the other. That's just my own personal experience.
So
yes, it's a hierarchy of order.
This is one of the reasons I would have preferred something like a potluck to the estuary protocol, because like there's nothing there other than talking, and I think you need something other than just talk.
Yeah, like
I
we
think
have
that's good.
our coffee hour run is always a potluck after every Sunday liturgy.
Right.
And that's kind of been the bedrock that's really solidified us as a community. Like, I mean, everyone in Archangel Gabriel, like we do genuinely hang out with each other. Like it's not like one of those things where like you show up for church, then you leave, and then you never see those people again until next Sunday rolls around, and then you exchange niceties, and then you leave again, and then see each other next Sunday. It is like a genuine, like, you know, an organism, a community, you know, members and parts of a body and a collective that engage with each other on a regular basis.
Jacob, I think that's really good, because actually that's happening naturally. Like, by the way, if you've got Nate involved in something, food's going to get involved in some way, because Nate likes to cook for people, right? The Chicago estuary, I know they like sometimes they go over to his house, they have a little cookout, and then they talk. Like, so they've integrated those community aspects to it, right? But I think that meal is really important, because the house church thing that we did, there was always a meal. Like whenever we got together, a meal was always centered around, right? Because that communal aspect, that community aspect. And so like in Kansas City at Jess's, we were just sitting out in his driveway around a campfire. He'd bring his fire pit out, and there was people sitting around, you know, a fire talking. And so I do think that, but the meal thing, actually, Jacob, you are a genius, by the way. You keep coming up with all the good, but that just tagged into one of my things. And again, the coffee hour, Jules, that's always a great time after liturgy, right? And there's lots of places where you get together and you eat with the church for lots of different reasons, right? Which is good. Is I do think starting estuary groups and incorporating meals around that, because it's easy to do. Like you bring some food and then you have your conversation.
And I think Dominique Vanderklay is going to have an easier time sort of finding, you know, producing that community that he wants so badly if he moves away from this didactic kind of approach towards, you know, just a more communal, less intellectualized meetings.
Yeah.
I'm going to speak in defense of the estuary protocols, because I've, you know, spent my life in evangelical churches that were great at the potlucks and the social things. And it's great for the people that naturally know how to socialize. But like the estuary thing, the whole point of that is that like you need to cut to the core to like get to the meaning stuff first. Like I don't know, you need both. And it's okay for them to be different, because I think you're getting a different group, like the more autistic people in the estuary group than you will in a regular like social thing. And then hopefully you have another separate thing where the estuary group says, wouldn't it be fun if we met on a Saturday afternoon and had a barbecue together? And then that's when you like bridge the gap. So
yep, absolutely. And I think the protocol, it's like even if you had a little meal and then you did the protocol afterwards, the protocol is really good because it helps introverts. It helps, like you mentioned, the folks that might be on the spectrum, right? It also helps shape the conversation, because things can get too out of whack. Because quite frankly, like even in 12 steps groups, there's an order of the way you do things, right? There's somebody opens the meeting with a certain preamble, then there's you do, then all of a sudden people will read how it works and the steps, and there'll be directions about this. It will say stay on topic, and then someone brings a topic, and that's the topic is. The conversation is limited to what there are people's alcoholism and not just anything under the sun. So it helps. Providing some guardrails does help some things. And so, yeah. And again, I think there's all the things. Like, this isn't the only thing. Like, because this isn't church. And I actually think the highest thing you can do is go to church. So, you know, like I'm not trying to say that it should replace that, but it's another it's another space and place. And all I do know is, and I don't know if you're noticing this, there's a wave. There are ebbs and flows in the TLC. There's a wave happening right now of people connecting. Like I haven't had. It's been even with before the long this conversation. People connecting, wanting to have my number or whatever stuff. Like there's more people showing up. There's something happening. There's a wave of something happening right now. There's some energy in the TLC.
Well, I mean, in Los Angeles, we had a group, and there were 6 of us together in the same room, and like people. I mean, a few people have serendipitously moved to Los Angeles, so we kind of have a group. Andrew didn't come, but there's an elder from Cross Point Church, which is where the Chino estuary meets, and I don't know if he's an active elder, but he's definitely been an elder in the church before. And he's in his 90s, Dr. Gary. And I think he's 98 or 99 now. And when he hasn't been able to come lately, but when he was coming, that was a huge contribution to the to the estuary, because he had a certain personal gravitas that and capability of like summing things up and talking about things in a like guidance giving way that frankly I don't know if you don't have such a person in the estuary if it works.
I mean, basically, I think I feel like the kind of estuary that Jacob's ultimately asking for is just more or less a Bible study led by a priest.
It's almost like Jacob doesn't like a lot of aspects of general Protestantism.
Well, that's good.
Well, and again, and I think for someone like you, Jules, who your participation in your church provides you everything you need for sense making. Well, yeah, it's a community, all the stuff that you're like, it's there for you. And so when you see that, you're like, why would people be doing this other thing? Like, and I totally get that, right? But you know, there are on ramps for people to do things. I had seen a lot of. So what happens? You know, what's happened here, Jules, and this has happened to Jacob too. I know people have found their way to reach out to him. Lots of folks. It's happened to Michael here and everyone else. Because people are seeing things online in certain conversations that, you know, I have reached out to other people and people have reached out to me where like there were specific things maybe I shared or whatever, life experience, whatever, that they're like, hey, you know, I'd like to talk about this thing. And I was able to share, you know, wisdom, experience, strength, and hope with that person. Some people, it might be getting them connected into a 12-step group in their local community, right? Which is important for them, which is really good. Or, you know, sharing some wisdom here or there, so on and so forth. So, like, I can totally see why people who have found, like, yes. Well, and it's why Pajot says go to church, right? Because he has thinky-talky symbolic world stuff, but he's also telling them, go to church, right? And yeah. Michael would tell someone, Michael, you would also tell someone, go to church, right?
Yeah.
Both and, you know?
So I guess where I'm coming from is like, I mean, for Alcoholics Anonymous, I don't think I'm qualified to give like a comment on that in and of itself. I'd leave that up to Jacob or Father Stephen. They can talk about that sort of thing. That's not really my wheelhouse. It's just my thing about the estuary, as in like, it's not like a support group. It's more or less just people kind of just endlessly philosophizing over a general subject. I think if it causes someone to participate in church, it is good. But if it is just endless philosophizing and trying to find meaning sort of, through, existential sort of inquiry, then I don't think that's really going to help people in the way that Dominic Vanderklee might think it would. I mean, I don't know his full position on this. So.
Well, I mean, ultimately, he's hoping to find Jesus.
Well, yeah. So.
No, here's the thing. I don't think. Okay, if and it may be in the case that some of people, some people are endlessly philosophizing. Like there's times and seasons I feel like when these online discussions in the corner are that way, it's like it just gets to a point, it's all cerebral, it's all hypothetical, and it's like, who the heck cares? But I would say that I think the point of having these groups is, I think we've really lost track of how much the social networking just of our society has deteriorated, and so it's people don't know how to get to the place where they could have these conversations organically. And I think that they have real issues. And I think, there's a big problem. Like, there's a lot of things that I would personally want to say, it happens in these streams. Lots of topics that I'm like, why is this a thing? Someone the people that are all hung up on biblical criticism, I'm like, just get over it. Like, why do you care? But in reality, these things are really serious and really mean something to somebody. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they need to find the answer in the group, but there has to be a group where somebody is willing to listen to them and take their concerns seriously. That was, I think, a big problem I noticed, with the COVID-19 stuff. A lot of pastors, people were coming up to pastors in churches, and probably across the spectrums of denominations and traditions, and they had these concerns, and then the pastors were dismissive of it and just be like, no, don't worry, whatever it was, whether if it was too concerned about we're not taking it seriously or too concerned that it's a conspiracy. Either way, when people get that dismissive thing, then they're just like, well, this isn't the place for me. So it's like, you need a place where people can have the freedom to say their own dumb thing that probably 99% of us don't care about, but it actually really means something to them, and just be heard and listened to and respected on a level playing field. So I think that's the ideal thing that it would provide. And church does dismiss a lot of stuff out of hand because it is stupid from the standpoint of, you already believe in God, but that's the use of an estuary.
Well, and the other thing is, if it was just philosophizing, which it can be sometimes, I'll use an uncouth term, Jacob will be okay with this. Sometimes there's just some mental masturbation going on around here, so whatever. But there are just too many stories of people that have talked about how their ability to talk with people in this space, do some sense making, integrate some things, how it's really impacted their life in an amazing way. And it's made them a better husbands and everything else. And so, and again, I'm just telling you, I've had real life conversations with people that I met through this space where I've been able to introduce them into a program that could potentially, save their life, And so there's real stuff that's going on here, and there's real community, and there is real relationship. And so I know that this has done a lot of good for a lot of people. I think that's why Jacob you've seen that. So there's a reason why you see something that's happening, and you do know that there are good things that are happening. But you want to make sure that, okay, I know there's some good things happening. How do we take, because there are people, the reason why I think you want to do Fountains of Comfort and why you want to get the signal out there more, Jacob, but I don't want to put words into your mouth, but it's like, people are in need of healing. They're finding their way here. Let's help them.
I count successes with children. If my Discord has in any way contributed to, Antonio and his wife are both on my Discord. They now are having a second child. Garth is getting married, which he sent me an invitation to his wedding. Well, he's going to send me an invitation to his wedding. I mean, it's ultimately in the number of children, because by their fruits you shall know them. And the literal fruits, I mean, this is an incredibly Jewish thing. When I visited Paul's church, I said, "Where are all the children?" And he said, "Oh, this is the normal life cycle of a church." And I didn't understand what he's talking about, because like if there's no second generation, what are you even bothering with? Like, why are you bothering?
Well, that's just because it became normal to move away when you go.
I don't know if it's that, because even Father Stephen mentioned that, like, back in his day, the CRC has been going geriatric for the past few decades, because with a lot of the secularization that's been going on and disenchantment, a lot of the youth either deconstruct or go full atheist, or eventually they just become nominal Christians and don't really show up that much anyway.
And when they move away, do they move to another church? That's the question. Like, okay, they
statistics. Yeah, so the statistics have been, so that, you know, if you follow the Pew stuff, and that's, you know, one of my church nerd things has been, is that it's really been since the 60s, right? And I think it is the secularization. It's all this stuff, right? Basically, fewer of the people are remaining in the church, right? And that's been accelerating. And so we have the rise of the nuns and everything else. And so what wouldn't have been natural 100 years ago has tended in most places to be church starts, it has families, the families grow up there, the church kind of has a thriving moment, and then all of a sudden the kids come out, very few stay, not a lot of young bloods coming in, and that's why you have tiny churches all over the United States. And it's not just CRC, it's pretty much every mainline has experienced this. And, you know, even Jules, you'll see this there. It's the Orthodox are not immune from having their youth becoming secularized and not coming back into church.
We have a lot. It's a lot of Creole youth who typically fall away, and then at a slightly less, like, they're not quite being fully replaced, but there's been a lot of influx of younger people coming in. So it's
100%. And I noticed
it's more of a shift, but
yeah, but the cradles are. So again, it is this societal thing that's happening, right? But I too have noticed, and Father Damick, like, I've noticed that, like, you're in an Antiochian church, right? So so there's a big difference between what I've noticed, and I've been in multiple cities now. There's something going on with the Antiochian church. They have the demographics that every pastor in America would die to have. A lot of young people, a lot of young families, they're having babies. I mean, there are churches that are doing this too, but by and large, if you look at the macro level, that's not happening, right? And so, you're seeing that. Now, you're having a lot of new converts. Like, the numbers, did you see Father Damick's video where he talked about the surge into Orthodoxy or whatever? And he started asking all of his clerical friends around the country, and it's just, they're seeing numbers that they haven't seen in the entirety of their congregations. Like, maybe they had 25 converts over a 20-year period, and now all of a sudden they're doing 25 in a year. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, the growth.
Yeah, the Antiochian Archdiocese in North America is the fastest growing sort of archdiocese. The OCA and the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese have been shrinking, especially for the OCA in the Northeast. But I mean, technically, the Greeks still hold, like, the in terms of raw numbers, they still hold the majority. But it's the Antiochians that are demographically increasing.
The Greek Orthodox Church of America has by far the highest membership. They have the lowest participation rate out of that membership, right? Yeah. And Greeks are very just culturally very successful. And so that's just the case. And so there's a lot of very wealthy, which then we know what that tends to lead to. There's a lot of the wealthy stuff ends up being a more progressive bent, right?
Like with
And I'm not,
complacency.
yeah, but so if you like, because again, if you look at those numbers now, I love my Greek archdiocese. My local churches are wonderful people, and we're not booming like the Antiochians, but the people that are there, I just love them dearly. Love my priests that I have had the chance to meet. Been very formative. The faithful are amazing people, and so I'm cool with it. But I've seen it uphand. Like these Antiochian churches are booming. It's nuts.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's. I'd probably track it. Like, if I were going to chalk it down, I'd probably just say that I can't speak for every single bishop out there in North America, but I would say that my overall experiences so far with all the Antiochian bishops that I've either heard of or seen have been overwhelmingly positive. I feel like our bishops genuinely love and care about our communities, and God is kind of blessing us through them.
Well, I mean, so you guys have a situation which the Greek Orthodox and Russian Orthodox don't, which is the major powers in the world are not invested in controlling your patriarch. Bartholomew and Kirill are people that various governments, including the U.S. government, including the Israeli government, are very invested in who is the patriarch, the ecumenical patriarch, and who is the Bishop of Moscow. And frankly, that creates a situation in which I just feel bad for the people who have a church. I mean, it's the same thing with the CRC. There's a reason why it was Eli Lilly gave $1 million to the to one faction of the CRC, the losing faction of the CRC wars at the synod, right? Anytime you have that type of external interest and desire to influence, it's just ugly and horrible, and I don't even know what you do when that is the case.
Well, so it's like, I get where you're coming from. The Moscow Patriarchate really only has influence over Rokor. OCA technically are autocephalous. Technically, when I mean that, like, in the sense that they aren't recognized as a valid patriarchate. There's still a metropolia, technically, but they're not under any other. Like, the Metropolitan is distinct, from the Russians in that respect. But, like, I mean, it's not even really Kirill or ecumenical patriarch that have influence. It's really certain, because the Metropolitan is sovereign in his realm. The patriarch can't just move on over and then tell the Metropolitan to pound sand and do what I want to do. So it's not like, the American bishops are so wonderful and great in Greece, but they're being strong-armed by the ecumenical patriarch.
No.
There really are some Greek bishops who have kind of, in desire to become more American, because a lot of people, whenever they kind of immigrate over, they try to assimilate, they kind of take on American culture. It's more of that in the case of like the Greeks and then some of the Russians who do want to assimilate, usually the wealthier ones.
I mean, obviously there's many factors involved, and I couldn't say it's one factor. It's just, it strikes me as one way in which the Antiochians have an advantage that that the others don't, which is, frankly, I don't know the name of your patriarch, and most people don't.
John the 10th of Antioch.
May he live long and believe in God forever.
But the person who really gives, like, who really directs the Antiochian Archdiocese is Metropolitan Saba. Like, he's sovereign within the Antiochian Archdiocese of North America.
And may he live long and believe in God forever. But Kirill and Bartholomew are not only actors on the world stage, but obviously pawns in the world stage. Meaning, they may themselves not be like, they may be trying to resist it, but there's a lot of people who are trying to influence who.
Oh yeah, that's obvious.
Yeah. Who they are and what they say and everything.
And that's happened throughout history, right? I mean, if you just go back and read the fathers there, see what happened to St. John Chrysostom and other folks. Like, there's this stuff kind of ebbs and flows, and there are great patriarchs and some that some people maybe would think aren't so great, whatever. The beautiful thing for me, Jules, is like, for me, Jacob too, is like, that's all above my pay grade. I don't have to worry about it.
Oh yeah.
Like, I just get to, like, do my prayer rule and show up to my local parish and participate in the parish life and, focus there. And then, like, I can leave the rest of it. Because the other thing, like, even within, like, I've asked some hard questions of some things I see to my local priest. And, Father Barnabas Powell is in the Greek Orthodox Church, right? And so he's pretty well known out in kind of social media world. I mean, he's holding the line. Pretty traditional. There's a lot of the priests, like, when you're the priest, like, they're just like, yeah, don't worry about this stuff. I mean, this stuff gets talked about, and all this stuff up here, like, there's a bulwark of people there. Also, I have found the faithful, for the most part, that are attending the parishes I'm at are very, very serious people, very faithful people. And so I just really don't have a lot of worries in the things that in the day-to-day life. If it were to come to a point that all of a sudden, let's just say the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese of America, something happened and they did something pretty wild and things were being enforced down the line. Well, the beautiful thing is I'm joining the Orthodox Church.
Well, you join your parish community,
Well,
so, like,
right.
when I was receiving
The
Orthodox.
point is, like, if it jumped a shark and something happened, I could just go to the Antiochian Church, 20 miles down the road.
I want to be perfectly clear, like, just the fact that Francis has a lot to be desired doesn't mean, like, anybody should leave the Catholic Church. And similarly, any mess, it doesn't matter if the bishops if there's problems with the bishops.
Right.
The only thing for me is the reason why I a little bit harp on this is I think, unfortunately, too many people have that impression, which then leads them to make the wrong choice, which is when they see something like that with Kirill or Bartholomew or even Francis, they're like, I can't be a member of this church. And it's like, you're not getting it. The church is bigger than any individual in any office. And Marcus put the link to this great article, which I'm glad to hear that actual Orthodox people are saying similar things. But he starts out, it almost goes without saying that the Orthodox world is a mess right now. He gives a bunch of examples. How did we get in this mess? In a word, geopolitics. I'm not sure you can reduce it to just that, but I think it's definitely been a problem.
Yeah, well, I'd say, like, the people, like, to what you were saying, Jacob, people kind of end up, some of them, sometimes whenever they enter Orthodoxy, they end up with kind of like a Catholic ecclesiology, where it's like, oh, instead of there being just, one pope, all the patriarchs are kind of like, a stratified, collection of, like, mini popes that all band together and create one, institution, which is the magisterium, which is never really quite the case. So, I mean, the beauty of being an Orthodox Christian is that someone who's not my spiritual father, not my bishop, I have the wonderful luxury of being nice and respectful. You listen to what they say, and then proceed not to do what they do, or do not what they say. You know,
Well,
I'm only really responsible to my spiritual father or to my bishop.
Your priest. Ask your priest, right?
Well, yeah, do what
traditional
your
Orthodox.
priest or
Yeah.
your bishop tells you to do. That's what it comes down to. Like, I don't have to worry myself with what, you know, Patriarch Kirill does or the ecumenical patriarch, because quite frankly, they're not the Pope. You know, they're not infallible. They're not extrajudicial.
Even within Catholicism, I mean, Father Eric will say a very similar thing, right? Like, the Pope is above his pay grade, and he does what he does. And frankly, that's true even within Catholicism. And what Marcus says here is what I've heard from actual faithful Eastern Orthodox over and over again. My priest said, I tend to ignore bishops and their squabbles.
Well, yeah, you can ignore it, like, if they're not your bishop. If it's your bishop and he tells you to something, you submit and follow.
Well, because the wisdom is this, Jules, is there's always stuff of the day and this stuff that's going on. Most of that stuff never materializes. You know what I mean? Like, you can worry about the rumors and the this, that, and the other, like, whatever.
Yeah, what
like,
certain
until
archbishops
something
do in certain places in Greece outside of their jurisdiction is none of my business. You know, I don't, not in the sense that, like, I can't recognize that it's bad or whatever. It's not like I'm not allowed to have an opinion. It's more like it doesn't have any bearing on my spiritual life or my life in general, because my life is my spiritual life.
Okay, gentlemen, I have to wrap this up and go.
I need to leave too.
Nice to meet you, Jules.
Nice
we
meeting
can
you, Lance.
wrap it up, but I do have to go back to being a productive person. Lance,
I have to run an errand too.
If you want to say something, continue. Yeah,
I'm good. I actually
nice to
have
meet
to
you,
run an
Jules.
errand. It was nice meeting you, Lance. Good seeing you, Jacob.
and thank you for participating, Marcus. Apparently, Marcus is working on his dissertation and then moving to the greater Los Angeles area. So Los Angeles is becoming a kind of Rome, you might say, of the TLC.
Oh, the fourth Rome or something.